Daenerys Targaryen stood upon the scorched plains before the broken walls of Winterfell, her gaze locked on the horizon where tendrils of smoke curled in the crisp northern sky. The wind whipped her silver-gold hair around her face as she inhaled the wintry air, feeling a pang of concern for all that was at stake. It had been only a day since the Night King's defeat, a victory that came at a high cost. Yet now, standing beside her still were the three majestic dragons that had once seemed so unlikely to survive the terrors unleashed by the Great War. For in this version of the world, Viserion had not been torn from her by the icy javelin, and Rhaegal had not fallen to the Iron Fleet's scorpion bolts. Instead, they all lived, Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion, circling overhead as if reminding the living that a different fate had taken hold. Few realized how close they had come to catastrophe. The Night King's spear had never found Viserion's heart. It had only grazed the dragon's wing, injuring him but not dealing that fatal blow. By some twist of fate, perhaps because Daenerys had urged him to bank just as the ice spear was loosed, or because the wind had caught the spear's tail, Viserion remained in the realm of the living. Though wounded, he was able to land beyond the reach of the undead host, protected by the combined might of the Unsullied and Dothraki, who fought valiantly against the swirling storm of whites. The cost in human lives was staggering, but the dragon survived, and Daenerys' vision of a better world remained alight with hope. The relief upon seeing Viserion alive had coursed through Daenerys like fire in her veins, fueling her resolve. She had nearly lost her beloved child, and in that desperate moment Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen as she now knew him, had led a detachment of knights and free folk to hold off the enemy while the wounded dragon was guided to safety. She remembered the screams in the dark, the swirling snow that battered them all, the wailing of men, and the howling of the undead. But the dragon still breathed, and so did her dream of reclaiming the Seven Kingdoms for House Targaryen without descending into that unimaginable grief. And so they had fought through that bitter night, with Rhaegal ravaging White Walkers from the air while Drogon blasted the ground with gouts of flame, scattering the undead with each roar. By dawn, the Night King had marched his host to the very gates of Winterfell, but inside those storied walls, the living had defied their own terror. Arya Stark's cunning and speed, aided by Bran Stark's acceptance of his role as the Three-Eyed Raven, proved enough to shatter the Night King's decades-long ambition. The legendary dragonglass blade found its mark, and the others collapsed in on themselves like shadows banished by the morning sun. Winterfell stood battered but unbroken, and the night truly ended. In the aftermath, Daenerys had walked among the wounded in the courtyard, her heart tightening at the sight of the living's suffering. They had all seen horrors beyond measure, men burned alive in dragon flame, soldiers in ancient armor and ragtag northern cloaks alike torn apart by whites, and helpless innocents in the crypts seeking safety only to be attacked by reanimated corpses. Yet somehow, despite the bleakness, they had survived. Her dragons were living symbols of her cause, living proof that she was meant to bring a new era to the Seven Kingdoms. In the following days, northern mistrust lingered, but gratitude began to melt the cold hearts of lords and ladies who had once looked upon Daenerys with skepticism. Sansa Stark, though still wary of Daenerys' ambitions, could not deny that the Dragon Queen had brought salvation with her dragons. Jon, her nephew and lover, spoke often about forging unity. He recognized the tensions coiling beneath the surface, but also saw an opportunity. With the threat of the dead behind them, the question of the Iron Throne loomed once more, overshadowing all other concerns. Viserion's wing healed slowly, and no maester in Winterfell had ever tended a dragon's wound before. Even so, Missandei organized a small group of healers who studied the dragon's cuts day by day, learning more of these magnificent creatures. Occasionally, Daenerys would feed the beast herself, letting him know he was safe, while Drogon watched protectively. Rhaegal, named in honor of Daenerys' fallen brother Rhaegar, hovered overhead like a sentinel. The presence of all three dragons within Winterfell's perimeter struck awe and fear into both commoners and nobility. Night after night, the dragons roared, a triumphant chorus that replaced the dreadful silence the others had left behind. Yet Daenerys knew that she could not linger here indefinitely. Word had reached her of Cersei Lannister's machinations in King's Landing. Euron Greyjoy had not managed to fell Rhaegal, and the Iron Fleet lurked, a menacing rumor along the coast. The Golden Company had made port in the capital, hired by Cersei's gold-laden coffers. And although the North was still recovering, Daenerys felt the stirrings of destiny calling her. The Iron Throne was hers by blood right. She had pledged to break the wheel of tyranny, to free the oppressed, to usher in a new age. With 3 dragons at her side and a northern alliance seemingly forged in the crucible of the long night, Daenerys decided that the time was near. Jon was torn, she could see that. He was a Stark at heart, or so he believed, but the secret of his parentage weighed heavily on them both. She knew it was only a matter of time before someone demanded an answer. Was Jon Snow truly the heir to the Iron Throne, or would the realm rally behind Daenerys, the mother of dragons? Every time Daenerys tried to broach the subject with him, it ended in half-spoken apologies, declarations of love, or tension so thick it could be cut by a blade. She wanted him beside her, not just as a counselor or lover, but as her partner in ruling if he so chose. Yet Jon was reluctant to overshadow her claim. He understood the North would stand behind him and might see Daenerys as a foreign conqueror. Daenerys, for her part, could not forget the glimpses of doubt in the eyes of the Northerners. She vowed to win their respect, if not their unreserved love, by action and truth. Preparations began at Winterfell, fueled by the cooperation of weary soldiers. The Dothraki, diminished but unbowed, prowled the courtyards and stables, uneasy in the cold. The Unsullied, stoic as always, set to drilling in the half-ruined fields. The North's remaining forces swore to follow the Targaryen queen if that meant reclaiming peace for the realm. Daenerys commanded new forges to be built to craft improved weapons, scorpion bolts included. She had learned the lesson: dragons could be wounded, and though she trusted her children to remain strong, she did not wish to see them threatened by the scorpion's deadly stings. The forges would also serve to create ballistae to counter the Iron Fleet, should it come to that. As winter slowly receded, the combined armies of the North and Daenerys Targaryen prepared for their southern march. The dragons soared, each day stretching their wings further, snapping at the cold air, reminding all who saw them that the Targaryen legacy was anything but extinguished. Viserion's wing mended under careful attention. He was soon flying again, albeit with a slight limp in the air, but it was enough. Hope rallied. Daenerys stood upon the ramparts, arms folded against the chill, staring out at the horizon that led southward to King's Landing and Cersei's last stand. She watched Rhaegal and Drogon banking in the distance, their silhouettes stark against the pale sky, and felt a quiet confidence that had once been overshadowed by doubt. Now, fate seemed to whisper that her time had arrived. While the living at Winterfell mended wounds, ghostly memories of the Great War lingered. Arya would sometimes drift through the halls at night, silent as a shadow, her face betraying unspoken burdens. Sansa spent long hours in the Godwood, thinking, forging alliances behind those keen eyes. Tyrion Lannister, Daenerys' hand, wore lines of worry across his brow, for though the war for the Dawn was done, the war for the throne was only beginning. He labored over the complexities of alliances, the uncertain loyalties of various lords. Each day, ravens departed from Winterfell bearing letters that Tyrion dictated, subtle pleas for support, cunning half-promises that might bring more lords to heel. Daenerys let him handle these matters, trusting his cleverness. She spent her time with her dragons and her people, forging connections that ran deeper than fear. She sat among the soldiers as they ate, listening to stories of their homes, the families they hoped to return to. Her compassion rose unbidden, warming her words as she vowed once again not to burn innocence in her pursuit of the throne. She was adamant that this conquest would be different than the ones before. She wanted the realm to see her as a liberator, not a tyrant. She remembered Meereen, Astapor, and Yunkai, how she had freed thousands from chains, how she had learned painful lessons about power and the burdens of ruling. Yes, Cersei was a tyrant who had to be deposed, but Daenerys wanted to avoid a bloody rampage. She carried the memory of her father's madness like a chain around her neck, a cautionary tale she swore never to repeat. When at last the time came to depart, a hush fell over Winterfell. Daenerys rode upon Drogon, of course, clad in pale furs that shimmered in the weak sunlight. Beside her, Jon mounted Rhaegal. It was a sight that rendered many watchers speechless, for the truth of Jon's lineage had spread in whispers, and here he was, a Targaryen in all but name, commanding a dragon. Viserion flew behind them, still bearing faint scars across his flank, but his roars echoed as powerfully as his siblings. The combined army stretched out below the 3 dragons, an unlikely union of Northmen, free folk, Dothraki, and Unsullied. Bran Stark, too, watched them depart, his eyes reflecting infinite knowledge. Sansa and Arya observed from the battlements, their expressions tempered steel. They had parted with Daenerys more amicably than before, though a hint of uncertainty remained. Yet neither could deny the debt owed. The free world existed largely because Daenerys Targaryen had arrived at the right time, with the right power at her command. Southward they went, the journey marked by cautious optimism. Villages, once ravaged by winter storms, greeted the caravans with a mixture of relief and awe. The presence of dragons overhead was a sight none ever forgot. And though the land wore the scars of the terrible winter, the warmth of spring slowly returned, thawing rivers and budding the first green leaves on the bare branches. Word of Daenerys' approach spread faster than any raven could fly, carrying the rumor that 3 dragons advanced upon the capital. Lords who had once sat idle began weighing their options, for if Daenerys Targaryen brought not only the might of the north but 3 living dragons, perhaps her cause was unstoppable. Or so many believed. There were skirmishes along the way, outlaws and broken men who took advantage of the chaos left by winter. But they were swiftly dealt with. The Dothraki screamers relished proving their prowess, and Grey Worm, at the head of the Unsullied, gave no quarter to those who pillaged and raped. Villages that once crouched in fear of roving bandits now found themselves liberated by the Dragon Queen's forces. Even so, Daenerys did not relish death. She insisted on showing mercy when possible, accepting surrender if it was offered. Those who raised arms against her people with no cause, however, faced the swift edge of the Unsullied spears. Such was the balance she strove to maintain, justice tempered by compassion, iron discipline softened by empathy. Jon rode often beside Daenerys during these days, sometimes upon Rhaegal, sometimes on horseback. Conversations between them were intense but affectionate. They spoke of the future, what the realm would look like once Cersei was dethroned. They discussed the future of the North, whether it might remain an independent kingdom or swear fealty to the Targaryen crown, how to handle the freed cities, and what would become of the Iron Islands. Jon was hesitant to claim the throne that he technically outranked Daenerys for by blood. He wanted no part in that politics, no crown upon his head. "My queen," he would say softly, his eyes reflecting a deep resolve, "I gave you my word. The realm needs you." And each time, Daenerys' heart would flutter, uncertain if she was more relieved or anxious. She loved him, but she also knew that love and politics were rarely separate. If the lords discovered a more advantageous path in rallying behind Jon, they might cause friction. Tyrion warned her of this repeatedly, suggesting that clarity was necessary. Daenerys, though, was not ready to relinquish her rightful claim, nor did she wish to overshadow Jon. Instead, she vowed to let actions speak. Once they toppled the Mad Queen, as she had come to think of Cersei, they would address the question of succession in a calmer climate. At least she hoped so. Camped by the God's Eye, they received their first major test. Euron Greyjoy's Iron Fleet had ventured inland up the Blackwater Rush and was raiding towns near the capital, sowing terror at Cersei's direction. A disguised scouting party led by Ser Jorah Mormont and Davos Seaworth brought back grim news. Euron was daring enough to attempt to blockade the royal approach by river, having outpaced them. Tyrion cursed the man's audacity, but Daenerys recognized a chance to quell any illusions of her vulnerability. She recalled the disastrous ambush at Dragonstone in another timeline, a timeline she was determined to erase from existence by her caution and preparedness. She would not let Euron surprise her again. With 3 dragons at her side, she had an undeniable advantage, but she was no fool. She summoned her war council that night, the flickering torches reflecting in the polished eyes of maps and figurines on the table. Grey Worm, Missandei, Jorah, Tyrion, Varys, and Jon huddled in close, laying out possible strategies. They decided to face Euron head-on, but with cunning. Grey Worm and a detachment of Unsullied would approach along the shore, while the Dothraki, hidden in the nearby hills, would wait for the moment of greatest chaos to charge. Daenerys, astride Drogon, would take to the skies with Rhaegal and Viserion in tandem. The plan was to force the Iron Fleet into defending themselves from dragon fire, while the cavalry and infantry overran them from the land. Tyrion liked the plan's boldness. Jorah was concerned but stood by Daenerys' confidence. Jon simply promised to be there, flying with her on Rhaegal if necessary, or leading from the ground if that was her wish. They launched at dawn. Mist clung to the river's surface, obscuring the shoreline, and the sound of war horns echoed as the first galleys of the Iron Fleet came into view. From her vantage point high above on Drogon's back, Daenerys saw the glint of scorpions mounted on the ships, each ballista poised to hurl death at her dragons. Her heart pounded. She had dreamt of losing her dragons once, and she could not bear the thought again. But she also remembered how Viserion survived the Night King's assault. This time she would be ready. With a soft command in High Valyrian, she directed Drogon into a low sweep, mindful of the ballista's angles. Bolts whistled through the air, monstrous hunks of iron. Some soared wide, some nearly grazed Drogon's flank, but the great dragon soared nimbly in a rolling maneuver. Then Daenerys unleashed the fiery word, Dracarys. Drogon spat flame, a jet of scorching brilliance that licked across the deck of Euron's flagship, setting sails and men ablaze. Screams rose as the flames devoured, but Daenerys steeled herself. She was at war. Another scorpion fired at them, but Drogon twisted away, his roars shaking the sky. Meanwhile, Jon circled on Rhaegal, launching an attack on the smaller vessels. Viserion, though still healing, joined them. Their threefold assault scattered Euron's lines. From the shoreline, Grey Worm advanced with his disciplined battalions of unsullied, shields locked, spears bristling. The Dothraki screamers thundered in from the hills, their war cries echoing across the plains. Ships attempted to turn and flee, but the cavalry had already swarmed the beach. Euron found himself squeezed between land and sky, fire raining upon him from above and unstoppable spear points bearing down on him from the shore. Still, Euron Greyjoy was a cunning fighter. He had lured them with a cunning plan of his own. As the Dothraki charged, hidden archers crouched on the decks of the ships, releasing volleys of arrows tipped with wildfire. Green flames erupted along the beach, claiming horses and riders alike. The shrieks of horses and men alike rose to the heavens. Even as Drogon's flames devoured the sails of one ship, another ship's catapult hurled barrels of wildfire into the air, a deadly arc that threatened to engulf the dragons. At Daenerys' command, Drogon wheeled around, flapping mightily to escape the green inferno. The edges of the blast licked Drogon's tail, scorching his scales. Daenerys' heart lurched in terror. He roared in pain, but pressed on. The surrounding air swirled with smoke, ash, and the harsh tang of burning flesh. Chaos roared below. Jon was determined to prevent a catastrophe. He guided Rhaegal into a dive, unleashing a scorching torrent that consumed the catapult. But as Euron's personal galley twisted in the river, scorpions swiveled, loosing a bolt that struck Rhaegal's side. The dragon roared, faltering, nearly crashing into the river. Jon clung to the harness, his knuckles white, fear gripping him. But Rhaegal fought on, beating his wings against the air, refusing to yield. Viserion darted in, raking the galley's deck with flame, scattering men from the scorpion's controls. Another bolt flew astray, snapping ropes and rigging. Euron, at the prow of his flagship, cursed loudly, his face twisted into something like glee and fear. This was no routine engagement. He faced the full fury of the Targaryen dragons. Grey Worm seized the chance, leading the Unsullied in a precise spear wall formation that boarded the crippled flagship. The clash of steel and the screams of men filled the air. Euron, famed for his brutality, emerged from the swirling smoke, caked in soot, swinging an axe that took out two Unsullied in swift arcs. Grey Worm advanced, spear at the ready. For a heartbeat, it seemed Euron might wreak havoc among the disciplined ranks. Then, in a rush of wind, Daenerys and Drogon dove. Flame fanned across the deck. Euron dove aside, barely escaping with his life as Grey Worm leaped away. The ship's deck cracked and snapped under the onslaught of flame, the mast collapsing with a roar. Euron hurled curses, retreating into the flames only to face Grey Worm once more. Their duel was fierce but brief. The Unsullied commander, unwavering, found an opening and drove his spear into Euron's side. With a gasp, the pirate lord collapsed onto the charred deck. Grey Worm eyed him coldly before wrenching the spear free. Flames licked the edges of the ship, creeping ever closer. As the vessel began to list, Grey Worm called for withdrawal. Euron Greyjoy, battered and dying, spat defiance even in his last moments, cursing House Targaryen. In the end, the Iron Fleet was shattered. Half its ships burned on the river, some capsized, others limping away with heavy damage. Daenerys B.A. Delay shaken by the near misses from wildfire and scorpions, guided Drogon to a safe stretch of shoreline. Jon, trembling with relief, managed to land Rhaegal as well. Viserion circled overhead, breathing heavily. The combined might of dragons, Unsullied, and Dothraki had carried the day, but at a cost. The green flames had claimed many Dothraki, and the Unsullied ranks stood thinner than before. Rhaegal, wounded again, bled from the bolt wound, though not mortally. Yora and others hurried to tend to the dragon, as Daenerys knelt by Drogon's side, checking the scorched scales along his tail. Tyrion surveyed the aftermath, shaking his head at the carnage. "We have delivered a mighty blow to Cersei's forces," he said quietly. "But I doubt the cost of battle will bring the common folk to our side. Fire and blood leave scars." Daenerys lowered her head. "I will not stop until the Iron Throne is won," she said, voice heavy. but I will remember the price we pay for every step." She turned to see Jon, who placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, echoing her burden. They would carry the realm's future in their hearts as they pressed onward. Word of the victory spread quickly, carried by mouths that spoke of dragons turning ships to pyres, of a pirate king's demise. Many lords, seeing Euron's defeat, decided that Cersei's cause was doomed. Some declared for Daenerys, sending messages that promised provisions or men. Others chose to remain quiet, to watch from the sidelines until the final outcome was clear. But the Queen's momentum was growing. As they advanced closer to King's Landing, the roads became more crowded with refugees, men, women, and children fleeing from the rumored slaughter to come. Daenerys commanded her soldiers to offer aid, to share bread and salted fish when possible. She refused to let her army be seen as butchers. In the evenings, she walked among the tents, distributing what blankets and food they could spare, her heart heavy with compassion. She recalled the many times in Essos when she fed the hungry freed slaves, promising them a better life. The gates of King's Landing loomed at last. The capital's outer walls bristled with men and scorpions, the Lannister banners fluttering proudly alongside the golden lion of House Lannister. From her vantage point on a ridge, Daenerys beheld the sprawling city. The thought of the innocent civilians huddled within pressed upon her mind. She remembered Missandei's soft-spoken counsel. "Remember who you are, Daenerys Stormborn, breaker of chains, not just a conqueror. If you must take the city, do so with as little bloodshed as possible." Daenerys had vowed exactly that, and she would keep her word. They prepared for the siege. Tyrion advocated strongly that they offer Cersei a chance to surrender. "The city has many innocents," he reminded Daenerys. "We must show them that we are not the monsters Cersei claims us to be." Missandei agreed, as did Jon. Grey Worm had fewer reservations, having witnessed the cruelty of House Lannister, especially after Missandei's near execution in another lifetime. But Daenerys insisted on giving them the chance, for she knew that winning the people's loyalty was as important as crushing her enemies. So Daenerys, upon Drogon, flew in a controlled arc above the city's walls, flanked by Rhaegal and Viserion. The sight caused a panic among the inhabitants, but Daenerys did not unleash flame. She circled once, then had her herald, accompanied by Tyrion under a white flag, approach the city gates. Tyrion addressed the defenders. "Queen Daenerys offers mercy. Lay down your arms. Open the gates. Surrender, and you shall be spared." The response came in the form of an arrow that nearly took the herald's head. Tyrion and the herald retreated under jeers. It was clear that Cersei had no intention of bending the knee. Thus, the siege began in earnest. Daenerys wanted to avoid an outright slaughter, so she ordered her forces to encircle the city, cutting off supply routes. She directed the dragons to destroy the scorpions on the outer walls first, carefully picking them off in swift dives rather than launching a wholesale inferno. The Lannister men, loyal or fearful, fired bolts skyward. Some found flesh, injuring Viserion further, who had still not fully recovered, but no mortal wounds were inflicted. Daenerys felt each injury to her dragons like a knife in her own heart. She pressed forward, knowing the city's defenders could not withstand a prolonged siege without supplies. Inside King's Landing, fear spread like a fever. Cersei, perched upon the Iron Throne in the Red Keep, received daily reports of sabotage, desertions, and riots. The Golden Company, though formidable, watched with growing dread as dragons soared overhead, picking off defenses one by one. Meanwhile, the cunning Qyburn invented new ways to refine the scorpion bolts, though their success had been limited. Each day the siege wore on, more refugees crowded inside the city, pressing themselves against the gates, hoping for some miracle. Eventually, the tension reached a breaking point. Daenerys' patience and her desire to limit bloodshed had given Cersei time to fortify the Red Keep. Finally, the Targaryen queen decided the moment had come to strike a decisive blow. She must cut the head from the snake. The plan was to break through the city's main gate with a coordinated push. While the Unsullied and Northerners stormed in on the ground, the Dothraki would exploit any breach or side entrance. Daenerys, Jon, and the dragons would focus on neutralizing the last scorpions and ensuring that Cersei could not use civilian hostages as a shield. Tyrion implored Daenerys to recall that many innocents still dwelled in Flea Bottom, the poorest district of the city. He asked her to keep her dragons away from the densest population centers. Though Daenerys' jaw tightened at the thought of letting Lannister forces possibly retreat into the city's labyrinth, she agreed. The dawn came, shrouded in low gray clouds. Daenerys, astride Drogon, soared toward the gates. Rhaegal and Viserion followed, Jon commanding Rhaegal with practiced ease. The defenders lined the parapets, scorpion bolts readied. The air itself seemed to vibrate with tension as if the city held its breath. Then, with a thunderous crash, the first wave of catapults from Daenerys' army hurled boulders against the gates. With splintered, walls trembled, and the echo of war resounded across the city. A second barrage followed, then a third, until the gates gave way. Lannister men poured out to meet the attackers, swords clashing against unsullied spears. Arrows rained down from the battlements while the Dothraki swooped in from the flank, their curved blades carving a path of destruction. Above them, Drogon and his siblings harassed the defenders on the walls. Drogon's flame obliterated a scorpion emplacement, scattering its crew. Viserion, though weaker, managed to torch another ballista, leaving it a twisted hulk of metal and ash. Rhaegal, still bearing scars from the earlier battles, crashed heavily onto a tower, crushing it underfoot. The Lannister forces stationed there fled in terror. Yet for all their might, Daenerys had ordered them to use caution to avoid unleashing flames indiscriminately upon the crowded streets. Some portion of the city's defenses lay beyond her immediate reach, shielded by rooftops teeming with civilians. As Grey Worm led the Unsullied in a methodical advance, the fighting spilled into the streets. They met pockets of fervent resistance. Lannister soldiers, forced by fear of Cersei's reprisals, battled the invaders in narrow alleys, turning cobblestones into deadly choke points. Throughout the chaos, Daenerys kept her focus on the Red Keep, visible across the rooftops, a looming symbol of Lannister power. She had no illusions about Cersei simply surrendering. The time had come to corner the queen and remove her from power. As the city walls fell, Daenerys guided Drogon low over the rooftops. Soldiers scrambled beneath them, some dropping their weapons, others loosing arrows that glanced off Drogon's scales. She heard the screams of frightened smallfolk caught between two armies. Her heart clenched. Was she not here to free these people? Every war demanded its toll. She prayed the cost would not be too high. Jon and Rhaegal joined her, circling above the Red Keep. Ballista bolts streaked upwards from the castle battlements. One missed Rhaegal by mere feet, another struck the stone ramparts, sending shards of rock flying. Daenerys directed Drogon to dive, unleashing dragon fire that incinerated the men manning the scorpions. The battlements exploded in flame. Cersei's banner, crimson and gold, caught alight, fluttering away as black embers. Daenerys caught sight of Lannister soldiers retreating into the keep's courtyard, but no sign of Cersei herself. Upon landing in the courtyard, Daenerys dismounted, her heart hammering. The air was thick with smoke, and the acrid stench of burning filled her nostrils. Grey Worm's forces pressed through the outer gates, swiftly dispatching or capturing the remaining Lannister loyalists. Jon joined her, sword drawn, wearing a northern cloak singed at the edges. Viserion landed behind them, hissing, while Rhaegal hovered above, scanning for threats. The Red Keep's tall doors were shut. Daenerys could almost feel Cersei's eyes upon her from within. Her blood felt hot in her veins as she advanced. One of Cersei's Queensguard emerged, battered and bloodied, his white cloak stained red. He offered no words, merely launched himself at the invaders with reckless ferocity. Grey Worm speared him swiftly. The man collapsed, his final breath rattling from his lips. Daenerys regarded the door, an echo of her first siege in Meereen, where the locked gates had once barred her path. She climbed atop Drogon once more, intending to burn the doors open. But then Tyrion appeared, panting from exertion, crying out for her to wait. He suggested a small group enter through a postern gate to capture Cersei alive if possible. If she dies in the flames, he said, you risk creating a martyr in the eyes of her supporters. Let her stand trial. Show the realm you are just. Daenerys hesitated but nodded. She turned to Jon and Grey Worm. Let's finish this, she said. They gathered a small party, Daenerys, Jon, Grey Worm, Tyrion, Ser Davos, and several Unsullied. They circled around the outer courtyard, picking their way through the rubble and shattered battlements until they found a narrow servants' entrance. There they encountered a handful of frightened servants who promptly surrendered. Tyrion urged them to flee, to go to safety. Within the keep's dim corridors, the group advanced, torches in hand. The clang of distant fighting echoed through the ancient stones. They passed deserted chambers, once lavish with gold and red drapery, now ominously silent. At times, terrified servants darted out of the shadows only to scramble away. Daenerys felt a pang of sorrow. This had been her family's seat of power centuries ago. The Targaryens had built this palace. And now, in reclaiming it, she found only ghosts and dust and the stench of blood. At last, they reached the throne room. The large doors were ajar, and inside, golden torchlight danced upon the pillars. Daenerys and her companions stepped forward, swords at the ready. There, at the far end of the hall, upon the Iron Throne, sat Cersei Lannister, dressed in a crimson gown. Beside her stood the towering form of Ser Gregor Clegane, the Mountain, helmeted and monstrous. Qyburn lingered by her side, his face pale. Cersei's eyes, twin pools of cold green, flicked over the intruders. Her lips formed a mirthless smile. The chamber felt eerily calm, despite the distant roars of battle. Daenerys drew herself upright, meeting Cersei's gaze with steely resolve. "Your city has fallen," Daenerys said, her voice echoing in the throne room. "The war is over. Surrender, and you may stand trial for your crimes." Cersei laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You think I fear your trial? This is my throne, usurper. You bring dragons and armies, lay waste to the city. You are no better than the mad kings who came before you." Daenerys felt a flash of anger. She had come here to free the realm from tyranny, not to be tarnished by the same brush of madness. "You murdered countless innocents," she retorted. "You unleashed wildfire on your own people, destroyed your enemies with no regard for human life. The realm cowers under your cruelty. Your reign ends here." Cersei rose from the Iron Throne as if the very seat bristled with indignation at her leaving. The Mountain stepped forward, sword drawn, blocking Daenerys' party. Qyburn looked as though he might plead for reason, but Cersei snapped at him. "Stay where you are, you simpering wretch. Or did you think I'd show mercy?" Qyburn trembled and stepped back. A hush fell. Jon leveled Longclaw, his expression grim. Grey Worm tightened his grip on his spear. Tyrion stepped closer to Daenerys, eyeing the Mountain warily. But then, from behind Cersei, came another figure, slender and dark-haired, stepping from the shadows behind the throne, Arya Stark. Daenerys' heart lurched in shock. How had Arya come here, past all those guards? Cersei remained unaware of Arya's presence for a fraction of a heartbeat. Then, with a startled cry, she turned. But the young assassin was swift as a viper. Valyrian steel gleamed in her hand. The Mountain spun, too slow. Arya's blade sliced across the back of his knee, seeking a chink in the plate. The massive knight bellowed, staggering. Cersei screamed, stepping away from Arya's blade. The next instant, the Mountain swung his enormous sword, nearly cleaving Arya's head from her shoulders. She ducked, rolling across the floor as the blade sparked against stone. Jon lunged to assist, and Grey Worm moved in to flank the hulking knight. The throne room erupted in chaos. Tyrion darted aside, away from the swirl of steel. Daenerys tried to follow, but the Mountain, unstoppable, fought with savage fury. Qyburn shrieked for him to protect the queen, but the monstrous knight had eyes only for Arya, whose cunning feints drew him away from Cersei. It was a dance of death. The Mountain towered over the slight figure, every blow potentially lethal. Yet Arya slipped in and out of range, her dagger a flicker of quicksilver. Jon circled around, slashing at the Mountain's exposed flank. The blade rang off plate, and the Mountain backhanded him, sending Jon sprawling. Grey Worm stabbed forward, but the Mountain seized his spear and wrenched it free, snapping it in two. In the confusion, Cersei started to slip away, heading for the side exit. Tyrion and Davos blocked her path, though neither man was a match for the queen in personal combat. But it was enough to make her hesitate. She looked wildly around, seeing her champion beset by multiple assailants. In a burst of speed, Arya slid beneath the Mountain's sword arm, driving her dagger into his side. Though the knight bellowed in pain, he did not collapse. He seized Arya by the collar of her leathers, lifting her off the ground. Daenerys cried out. Grey Worm tried to intervene, only for the Mountain to fling Arya at him, sending them both crashing into the floor. Jon, shaking off his own daze, rose and attacked again, slicing at the back of the Mountain's knee, which Arya had already weakened. The monstrous knight buckled, falling to one knee. Suddenly, there was a surge of movement. Sandor Clegane, the Hound, emerged at the threshold, battered and bleeding from the fight through the keep. His eyes locked on his hated brother. Without a word, the Hound launched himself at the Mountain in a brutal tackle. Swords clattered. The siblings wrestled, punching and smashing each other, heedless of pain. In seconds, they had toppled off a short dais into a swirling melee. Arya, gasping for breath, regained her feet. Jon and Grey Worm pressed forward to ensure that the monstrous knight stayed pinned. The Hound snarled, plunging a dagger into the Mountain's side. An inhuman growl tore from the giant. Then Grey Worm's spear struck home, through a gap in the armor under the helm. The Mountain jerked, a final roar echoing in the throne room before collapsing with a thunderous crash. Blood pooled beneath him. Amid this chaos, Tyrion and Davos had cornered Cersei. She held a small dagger of her own, her face contorted in desperation. "You'll all die," she hissed. I will not yield to a pretender with scaly beasts, but her words died in her throat as she saw the unstoppable approach of Daenerys Targaryen, flanked by Jon Snow, Arya, and Grey Worm. The Hound, breathing raggedly, stood behind them. Cersei found herself with nowhere left to flee. Daenerys's gaze was stern as she beheld her greatest rival. She thought of all the death and suffering that had led here, all the innocent lives lost because of the schemes of this one ruthless woman. She remembered the thousands who had died in the Great War and the hope she carried for a better realm. She would not let vengeance consume her. Instead, she lifted her chin. I offer you the chance to surrender, she said softly, her voice echoing in the vast, shattered throne room. Stand trial before the people you have wronged. Answer for your crimes. Cersei's lip curled. She looked from face to face, seeing no mercy. Yet perhaps some lingering sense of pride kept her from groveling. She hurled the dagger aside with a clatter. I built this city into my fortress, she spat bitterly. If you think you can rule these spineless wretches better than I, then take your throne. It will devour you in time. With that, she raised her arms in mock surrender. Daenerys signaled Grey Worm. He seized Cersei's hands and bound them, ignoring her furious glare. Tyrion drew in a shaking breath. He had once loved his family in spite of it all, but the sight of Cersei in chains brought no joy, only relief. The war was won. The city, battered but not burned to the ground, was now under Daenerys's control. Outside, the roars of dragons still echoed, but the fighting had mostly ceased. The Lannister troops, leaderless and cornered, had thrown down their weapons. The bells in the city's sept began to ring, a scattered, discordant symphony that heralded the end of a regime and the dawn of a new one. Daenerys looked toward the Iron Throne. It gleamed in the torchlight, a fearsome seat of power forged from 1,000 swords. She remembered the stories told to her as a child, how her ancestors had shaped that throne with dragon flame. And now, in some twist of destiny, she stood ready to claim it without the carnage that could have ensued had she unleashed the full might of her dragons. People would still suffer, still fear. But she had spared countless lives, if not all. She exhaled softly, recalling the oath she made to free the realm from tyrants. Now she must prove herself worthy. Days of aftermath followed. Daenerys set up temporary governance. She ordered the city's gates opened so that food and aid could enter. The small folk, frightened and exhausted. Days of aftermath followed. Daenerys set up temporary governance. She ordered the city's gates opened so that food and aid could enter. The small folk, frightened and exhausted, now saw their new queen distributing bread, water, and basic medicines to the wounded. She commanded the Unsullied and the northern soldiers to show restraint, to punish only those who still clung to violence. It was not always easy. Hatred and suspicion lingered in back alleys, and some blamed Daenerys for the city's ruin no matter how carefully she had waged her war. Yet, for every fearful or bitter face, there were 2 or 3 who looked upon her with cautious hope. They understood the city could have been destroyed in a conflagration of dragonfire, and somehow it had not. That small mercy was a seed for something better. Through the broken gates of King's Landing, caravans arrived bearing grain and salted fish from the north, lentils and flour from the Reach, and casks of fresh water tapped from the nearest untainted wells. Much of this aid was coordinated by Tyrion and Varys, who employed their knowledge of the capital's labyrinthine bureaucracies to ensure distribution reached the neediest districts first. Daenerys was seen publicly encouraging mothers struggling to feed their children, kneeling beside injured soldiers of both sides and promising them fair treatment. Though many had scars, physical and emotional, the queen's willingness to see them as people rather than trophies or enemies softened hearts. She noticed that after a few days, more of the city folk emerged from hiding, tentatively trusting that the worst might be over. During these early days, Daenerys also oversaw the cleanup of the city's main thoroughfares. The acrid stench of ash and burnt debris still hung in the air. Broken masonry and scorched wooden beams littered the streets, some from her own dragon's assaults, others from the catapults and ballistae fired in the city's last desperate stand. Here and there, pockets of greenish residue indicated where wildfire had burned. She commanded the Unsullied to section off those areas until the pyromancers could be brought in to neutralize any lingering caches. The last thing King's Landing needed was another accidental detonation. Jon Snow remained at her side throughout. He personally led teams of northern volunteers who helped clear rubble, all too aware that a simpler path might have been wanton destruction. He reflected often on the difference between this conquest and the potential horror they had narrowly avoided. At times, he felt a strange dissonance. He was a Stark, raised in the north, sworn to defend the realm against the White Walkers. Now here he stood in the heart of the south, helping a Targaryen queen rebuild. But she was more than a monarch to him. She was the woman he loved, who had fought for all living creatures during the long night and who had tempered her own dragonborn wrath to spare thousands. That carried weight in his heart. Whenever doubts fluttered about his claim to the throne, he recalled his vow never to usurp her. The realm, he kept telling himself, needed them united, not torn apart by genealogical technicalities. The Red Keep, half-ruined in some wings but still imposing, became a focal point of reconstruction. Teams of carpenters, stonemasons, and laborers arrived day by day, some local, some from other regions, all seeking honest coin and a chance to be part of a new era. Under Grey Worm's watchful eye, these workers began clearing out collapsed corridors, erecting temporary scaffolding where walls needed shoring up and carting away debris in wagons. The dragons occasionally soared overhead, casting immense shadows over the workers. At first, there were shudders of fear whenever Viserion or Rhaegal glided close, but gradually that terror dulled into a wary respect. Daenerys forbade them from perching anywhere near the sections of the keep that were unstable, so more than once, Drogon's roar of impatience shook the scaffolding when forced to circle in the sky. Sansa and Arya Stark remained in King's Landing longer than many expected. Sansa's presence surprised southern lords who had heard rumors of her iciness toward Daenerys. Yet, the Lady of Winterfell carried herself with cautious diplomacy. In the initial war council, she had been reluctant to trust the Dragon Queen, but she could not deny that Daenerys had delivered on her promise to fight for the North against the Night King. Then, in the Second War, just concluded, Daenerys had shown surprising mercy. Sansa, never one to trust easily, still harbored doubts, but she recognized that alliances were built on shared experiences. If Daenerys had truly come as a liberator, the North had little to fear. Still, Sansa kept a close eye on every new decree, every new measure. She would not allow the North to be subsumed by some grand Targaryen ambition. Arya Stark, on the other hand, was far less concerned with politics. She had quietly slipped into King's Landing ahead of the main force, using her skills from the Faceless Men to avoid detection. Arya had known, deep down, that she might have a chance to strike at Cersei if the city fell into chaos. In the end, her timing had allowed her to distract the mountain long enough for Daenerys' forces to capture the Queen alive. The memory of that close-quarters struggle still made her pulse spike. She bore a bruise on her shoulder from being hurled against the flagstones, but the wound was healing and her face betrayed little pain. What lingered was a sense of finality. The woman who had orchestrated the Red Wedding, who had mocked the idea of justice, was now in chains. That was not to say the transition was entirely seamless. Some corners of the city rose in sporadic riots. There were those who had fiercely backed Cersei, convinced that any foreign queen with dragons would be a second coming of the Mad King. Others were simple criminals taking advantage of the chaos to loot and murder. Daenerys unleashed the Unsullied to patrol these pockets of unrest, instructing them to use minimal force. The Sandii worked tirelessly with local notaries to track which houses had been forcibly seized by Lannister soldiers so they could be returned to their rightful owners or purchased by new families if the old were gone. Step by step, the city was becoming more orderly, though not everyone was pleased. News of Cersei's imprisonment spread through the Seven Kingdoms like wildfire. In the Westerlands, some of the lesser Lannister bannermen wrung their hands, uncertain whether to declare open rebellion or to bow to this new Targaryen queen who seemed unstoppable. Kevan Lannister, a distant cousin with no real claim to leadership, sent a letter pledging cautious support if the queen would spare the great seat of Casterly Rock from punitive measures. Tyrell loyalists in the Reach, newly led by a resurgent branch of House Florent and guided by those who had once served House Tyrell, looked upon Daenerys favorably. She had avenged the murder of Olenna Tyrell in a sense, toppling the Lannister regime that had stolen the Reach's wealth. Dorne, ever proud, hovered on the periphery, but ambassadors from Sunspear arrived at King's Landing to see firsthand how Daenerys intended to rule. If they found her wise, they might pledge themselves. Amid all this, the trial of Cersei Lannister loomed. For many, the idea that Cersei still lived was shocking. Under any other conqueror, she would have died swiftly and spectacularly. But Daenerys was determined to show a new kind of justice, one that was not simply reliant on burning enemies alive. She wanted the realm to know that she would give even her gravest foes a chance to defend themselves, to be judged by more than the victor's wrath. It was a delicate game, for plenty of her own supporters felt that Cersei's immediate death would have been a stronger statement of power. The Dothraki, for instance, could not fathom why she would spare an enemy who had defied her so boldly. Grey Worm, too, carried bitterness for all his fallen brothers. He did not question his queen openly, but Daenerys could see the flicker of disappointment in his eyes when she spoke of a public trial. Cersei herself languished in the Red Keep cells. Now and then, Daenerys would send Tyrion to speak with her, hoping perhaps some last shred of humility had taken root. It never had. Each time Tyrion returned, his face was drawn, his voice weary. Cersei's hatred burned undiminished. She mocked the idea of a fair queen, spat at the mention of Daenerys, and refused to admit wrongdoing for anything, not the wildfire, not her betrayals, not the terror she had unleashed. Tyrion tried to see some glimmer of regret in his sister's eyes, but found only the same icy contempt. If Cersei was afraid, she hid it well behind rage. When the day of the trial finally arrived, the skies of King's Landing dawned with a thin golden sheen. Smoke from the city's many cook fires twined through the early light, creating a haze that seemed almost surreal. Daenerys, dressed in a simple but elegant black gown trimmed with silver thread, took her seat on a dais erected in the broad square outside the Red Keep. She did not want the trial hidden away in the keep's throne room, overshadowed by the imposing iron throne and cut off from the people. Instead, the stage was set in plain sight of the crowd so that all might witness the proceedings. The presence of the dragons was impossible to ignore. Rhaegal perched upon a sturdy section of battlements, huffing quietly, while Viserion spread his wings in the sunlight, his pale coloring glinting like polished bone. Drogon soared overhead in wide arcs, occasionally releasing a roar that rattled the scaffolds. Few in the crowd dared speak above a whisper when the dragons' shadows passed over them. Lords and ladies from across the realm had gathered, some with retinues displaying sigils once loyal to the Lannisters, others flaunting the dire wolf of House Stark, the crescent sun of Dorne, or the golden roses of the Reach. A tapestry of heraldry wove around the makeshift plaza, each house sending at least one representative to see the dethroned queen stand trial. The common people turned out in droves, drawn by curiosity or the promise of free bread and wine distributed afterward. There was tension in the air, as if the entire city still braced for a vengeful twist of fate. The proceeding began when Grey Worm, standing stiff and solemn, brought Cersei forth in chains. She wore a plain gray shift, her once perfect hair tangled and limp. Jeers erupted from parts of the crowd, though others stood silent, perhaps still harboring old loyalties or simply afraid. Cersei's eyes flicked across the assembly, lingering on Daenerys with an unspoken loathing. Tyrion observed her from beside Daenerys' seat, his face betraying no satisfaction. He had argued for mercy, yes, but the spectacle of seeing his sister shamed stirred no delight within him. Daenerys stood, quieting the crowd with a gesture. She reiterated what this trial was meant to accomplish, a reckoning for the crimes committed against the realm. The charges, read aloud by Varys and Davos, included treason, murder, the unlawful use of wildfire, the destruction of the Great September, and more. Witnesses were called. Some were lords who had lost kin when the September of Baelor exploded. Others were small folk who had seen their loved ones crushed or burned by Cersei's schemes. The testimony painted a harrowing picture. Cersei stared forward through it all, unblinking. When Cersei was invited to speak in her defense, she laughed, a hollow, mirthless sound that bounced off the high stone walls. She denounced the trial as a farce, accused Daenerys of being a foreign invader with no legitimate claim, insisted that everything she had done was to protect her children and House Lannister. Those who stand in judgment today, she hissed, are no better than the usurpers who took my father's head. But do as you will. You think this is justice? This is vengeance disguised by a veneer of mercy. The crowd rustled at her words, but most seemed unsympathetic. Too many had suffered under her yoke to be swayed by talk of paternal or maternal duty. Daenerys exchanged a quick glance with Tyrion. His jaw tightened. He had known that any last conversation with Cersei would likely yield no contrition, but it still stung. At length, Daenerys reminded everyone present that the choice was not hers alone to make. She had established a council of lords, Northerners, Reachmen, Dornish, Stormlanders, and other principal houses, to hear the evidence. This group would advise her on the sentence, to ensure it was not the whim of a single monarch. She wanted the realm to see that a new age had dawned, one in which a queen could be guided by the wisdom of her people. That evening, the council deliberated behind closed doors. The evidence was incontestable. Even lords who had once been allied with the Lannisters dared not refute the atrocities. The question then became, what punishment was appropriate? A few demanded immediate execution, citing the scale of her crimes. Others suggested life imprisonment, so that she could fade into obscurity, stripped of power. Tyrion argued quietly that while he had no sympathy left for his sister's cruelty, a swift death might still be kinder than letting her rot in a cell. Sansa, speaking for the North, noted that mercy could be seen as weakness, but also recognized Daenerys' stated mission to break the cycle of brutality. Davos, known for his compassion, believed a measured sentence would signal a true break from the days of burn them all. The debate stretched on, heated at times, hushed at others. Daenerys remained outwardly calm, though inside she wrestled with the knowledge that half the realm expected her to kill Cersei, and the other half feared she might do so in a monstrous display of dragonfire. In the end, the council recommended execution by the sword, a method that would be considered honorable in Westeros, free of the spectacle of burning or other cruelties. They reasoned that Cersei was too dangerous to be permitted to live, her crimes too grievous to merit a lesser punishment. The realm needed closure, not indefinite uncertainty about Cersei's existence. Daenerys accepted this counsel with a heavy heart. She addressed the council privately. "I have no love for this woman. She shed innocent blood, betrayed alliances, and nearly cost us all our lives in the war for the Dawn. But I cannot take pleasure in her death. If we do this, we do it as a final measure, not as an act of cruelty." The next day dawned grim, slate clouds gathering overhead as though the sky itself sensed the finality of what was to come. A wooden platform was erected in the courtyard of the Red Keep, surrounded by ranks of unsullied holding spears. The city's notables and curious citizens clustered at a cautious distance. Daenerys arrived on foot, wearing a cloak of black and silver furs. Jon Snow stood beside her, expression somber. Arya and Sansa watched from nearby, their own feelings complex. Cersei had brought suffering upon House Stark, and yet there was no triumph in seeing her brought low. Tyrion lingered at the edge of the platform, his head bowed, while Varys and Missandei stood close to Daenerys in quiet support. Cersei was led forth. She moved with stiff defiance, though her eyes flickered with something that might have been fear as she beheld the swords and spears glinting in the cloudy light. No grand speech was made. Daenerys spoke only a few words, affirming the sentence decided by the lords of Westeros. Then she turned to Grey Worm, who nodded. As commander of the Unsullied, he understood he was to carry out the sentence. Cersei knelt with difficulty, forced down by 2 guards. A hush blanketed the courtyard. The only sound was the sigh of the cold wind. A single stroke ended Cersei Lannister's life. Blood darkened the platform's timber. The crowd seemed to exhale all at once, a collective release of years of tension and fear. Some might have expected Daenerys to roar with triumph or to call for horns and drums, but she did neither. She remained still, eyes closed, absorbing the irrevocable truth that Cersei, her greatest rival, a symbol of everything cruel and unyielding in the old regime, was dead. When she opened her eyes, she saw Tyrion's tears and felt an unspoken sympathy. Despite everything, he had lost the last living member of his immediate family. He glanced at Daenerys, and she gave him a small, acknowledging nod. There was nothing more to say. In the days that followed, the city's mood shifted again. Many felt relieved that the Lannister reign was truly over. Others, uncertain, feared the Targaryen queen might yet show her father's madness. But Daenerys continued to prove them wrong in her governance. She pardoned minor officials who had merely followed Cersei's orders under duress. She invited the faith of the Seven to resume services, provided they did not preach sedition or violence. She met personally with artisans, blacksmiths, and guild leaders to discuss how best to restore trade. Food distributions remained a priority, and though resources were stretched thin, the queen's willingness to share what her armies had brought from the north and the reach earned her a growing reservoir of goodwill. Reconstruction advanced at a steady pace. Stones were carted from old quarries to mend damaged walls. Charred timbers were replaced. Tyrion oversaw the hiring of new architects to evaluate the structural integrity of the Red Keep's southwestern corner, which had been weakened by dragonfire. He also proposed a grand project, the restoration of the Dragon Pit, not just as a stable for dragons, but as a symbol of unity. Daenerys liked the idea, though she cautioned they move slowly. Her treasury was not limitless, and she had to balance ambition with practicality. Nonetheless, the notion of a functional Dragon Pit appealed to her. Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion had few comfortable places to roost, and as they grew, the city needed a safer environment for them. As the capital stabilized, Daenerys turned her eyes beyond the walls. The realm needed unifying. She dispatched riders to secure pledges of loyalty or neutrality from the Crownlands, the Stormlands, and the Westerlands. She wrote letters to the north, reaffirming her gratitude for their loyalty. Sansa responded in measured terms. reminding Daenerys that the North would remain watchful but was not opposed to forging deeper ties. Jon traveled back and forth between King's Landing and Winterfell, ensuring communication remained open. In these trips, he brought news of the northern harvests, the state of the rebuilt castle walls, and the well-being of the free folk who chose to settle just south of the wall. Daenerys took solace in these updates. Though she missed Jon whenever he departed, she understood he was torn between two worlds, the Stark heritage that shaped him and the Targaryen fire he carried in his blood. Amid these political tasks, Daenerys found moments of quiet to be with her dragons. She would steal away at dawn, climbing a section of the city walls where Rhaegal liked to perch. There, she would stroke the green scales along his neck, feeling the gentle rumble of his breathing. Viserion, his pale hide still bearing faint scars, often joined them, pressing his head close as if seeking reassurance. Drogon, ever watchful, soared overhead, rarely settling in one place unless Daenerys commanded it. Sometimes Jon accompanied her, in awe of these creatures that had accepted him. He would watch as Daenerys murmured soft Valyrian phrases, as though speaking to her children. Their bond made him reflect on his own identity. He was Aegon Targaryen in name, yet Jon Snow in heart. Perhaps that duality would always remain. Over time, the swirl of major crises in King's Landing began to subside. Markets reopened, craftsmen returned to their trades. Horses, mules, and oxen trudged through the streets pulling carts of building materials. Children played in the squares. People still spoke in hushed tones of the day when Cersei fell and the dragons roared overhead. But that memory was slowly giving way to the day-to-day business of survival. Daenerys recognized that if her reign was to endure, she had to prove not just strength, but longevity, a dedication to ensuring peace, justice, and prosperity across the Seven Kingdoms. She convened councils frequently, listening to grievances from every corner. Tyrion served as her hand, Missandei as her trusted advisor and voice of compassion, Varys as her spymaster. Grey Worm remained commander of the Unsullied, but he too began to consider how his people might find a lasting place in this realm. They were soldiers. What would happen when the fighting was done? Some answers arrived when a delegation from Noth reached King's Landing. They carried with them messages of thanks for Daenerys' liberation of slaves in Essos, news that certain slavers still raided coastal villages, and a plea for assistance. The gentle folk of Noth were vulnerable to marauders, especially with the uncertain conditions in Essos. Daenerys felt the old fire rise in her veins, recalling her vow to break the wheel everywhere. But she had obligations here as well. After consulting with her council, she offered the assistance of a small naval escort, ships manned by experienced sailors from Westeros and guarded by a detachment of Unsullied who volunteered to protect Noth's shores. Grey Worm personally took an interest as he and Missandei had once dreamed of a life in Noth away from war. Though Missandei felt torn, she chose to stay with Daenerys for now, trusting that Grey Worm's men would do their utmost to safeguard her homeland. Meanwhile, Yara Greyjoy, now firmly in control of the Iron Islands, sent ravens offering an alliance, provided her people were allowed autonomy over their seas. Daenerys weighed the offer carefully, recalling how Euron had once ambushed her forces. But she also remembered Yara had pledged loyalty early on, and the Iron Islands' naval strength could be vital in the future. Accepting the alliance, Daenerys recognized the Ironborn's desire for self-rule but required they renounce piracy against Westerosi vessels. Yara agreed with typical Ironborn bluntness. It was a tenuous understanding, but a step toward bridging old hostilities. In these shifting alliances, Daenerys discovered that the realm needed not a single iron-fisted ruler, but a careful balance of powers. She was queen, yes, but she could not micromanage every holdfast and region. She began encouraging each region, North, Vale, Stormlands, Reach, Westerlands, Crownlands, Iron Islands, and Dorne, to send representatives to a new advisory council. The hope was to address common concerns, trade, roads, justice, and the threat of any resurgence of instability through open discussion. Some lords resisted at first, fearing loss of autonomy, but Daenerys' track record of listening and responding with fairness changed minds. Slowly, the concept of a more participatory governance took shape. One evening, after a long day of hearings, Daenerys sat in her private solar, which overlooked the city. The slant of the late sun gilded the rooftops in orange light. She was reading a report on the harvesting capacity of the Reach when Jon knocked softly and entered. He wore simple leathers, his hair still damp from a recent wash. She closed the parchment, smiling wearily. "You work too hard," Jon said quietly, approaching her. She rose and moved into his arms, letting the tension flow out of her shoulders. For a long moment, they simply stood there, the hush of the city drifting through the open windows. "There's much to be done," Daenerys murmured. "Sometimes I fear if I look away for a moment, the realm will unravel again." Jon's hands rested on her shoulders. "You've done more than anyone thought possible. The city heals a bit more each day." She sighed, remembering the charred remains of homes she had passed on her inspection route earlier. "I hope so, but we both know there are lords who might challenge me if they sense weakness. I must show them I'm serious about rebuilding, not just conquering. Yet I wonder, is it enough? Will I be condemned forever for the sins of my father, or the violence I unleashed here?" Jon brushed a strand of silver hair behind her ear. "You spared King's Landing from devastation. You offered Cersei a chance to yield. You held a trial. You feed the hungry, rebuild homes. The realm sees your actions. They speak louder than any rumor." She turned, looking out the window at the sprawl of King's Landing. "It took fire to claim the throne. Now I want to nurture peace with that same fire, but carefully so it warms rather than destroys. When I was in Essos, I freed slaves and tried to make them my people. I faltered, lost control. I won't repeat that mistake. This time, I must learn from those lessons." Jon's arms tightened around her. "You are not alone in this, Daenerys. Let me share the burden. Let your council share it. That's why you have us." She leaned her head against his chest. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the comfort of his presence, the quiet certainty in his voice. He was right. She had good people beside her. Tyrion, Missandei, Grey Worm, Varys, and the newly arrived ambassadors who seemed willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. And of course, Jon himself, who had proven time and time again that his loyalty was genuine. That night, she found a measure of peace she had rarely experienced since arriving in Westeros. In the following weeks, Daenerys embarked on a grand progress through parts of the realm to reaffirm her rule and see the devastation wrought by war firsthand. She traveled with a modest retinue, unsullied, a few Dothraki outriders, and key advisors. Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion circled overhead for much of the journey, though she advised them not to linger too close to villages unless necessary. The sight of dragons could terrify peasants who had never witnessed such creatures before. Nonetheless, their presence was a deterrent to any who might think to ambush the royal party. They rode through the Kingswood, which still bore scorch marks from stray wildfire blasts. They visited Rosby and Duskendale, hearing from local lords about the strain of winter on their harvests. Daenerys commanded that grain from the Reach be shared to stave off famine. She insisted on fair prices or barter arrangements, refusing to exploit either region's vulnerability. From there, they ventured into the Stormlands. The seat at Storm's End had been granted to Gendry Baratheon, legitimized by royal decree. Daenerys was curious to see how he fared. Storm's End loomed on a cliffside battered by the sea, its massive drum tower defying the crashing waves. Gendry greeted them in the courtyard, clad in simple armor bearing a noose sigil that merged the Baratheon stag with a small hammer motif, a nod to his own background. He knelt before Daenerys, though a bit awkwardly. She bade him rise, recalling the time she had legitimized him after the long night. His leadership, so far, had been met with mixed opinions. Some lords doubted a blacksmith's son, but others admired his straightforward honesty and his desire to protect the small folk. Daenerys spent several days there, listening to the needs of the Stormlands, roads washed out by heavy rains, lack of manpower after the wars, a precarious store of grain. She promised support where possible. Gendry, for his part, vowed loyalty and gratitude. He mentioned that Arya Stark had visited once, albeit briefly, and Daenerys noticed a flicker of affection in his eyes at the mention of her name. Continuing west, Daenerys rode through lands once ravaged by the Lannisters' demands for men and supplies. Some villages were half abandoned, their fields overgrown. In others, the people seemed to cling to hope that the new queen might spare them from further taxes or raids. Daenerys distributed coin from the royal treasury to hire local laborers for rebuilding roads. She dispatched surveyors to assess each region's needs. The process was slow, but every village she visited, Every conversation she had chipped away at the old fear that a dragon queen brought only fire and blood. When she at last reached Highgarden, she gazed upon the rolling green fields that had once fed half the realm. The castle itself was still in partial disrepair from the upheavals after the Tyrell's downfall. A minor branch of House Tyrell's extended family, distant cousins, had returned to claim stewardship under Daenerys's permission, though the main line had perished. They received the queen respectfully, serving a lavish feast with the freshest produce they could muster, roasted vegetables, succulent fruits, and bread still warm from the ovens. Daenerys recognized that this region could be the breadbasket for a renewed Westeros, and she spoke at length with the local stewards about irrigation, trade routes, and labor shortages. Tyrion, delighted to see a region so potentially prosperous, offered suggestions on fair taxation that would allow the farmers to flourish while also filling the royal coffers. Highgarden's new stewards were eager to please, knowing their fortunes depended on the queen's favor. On the last evening there, Daenerys strolled through the famed gardens. Many of the ornate hedgerows and topiaries had withered, but new plantings were taking root. She found a small bench beneath a flowering trellis and sat, letting the fragrance of roses and lavender wash over her. The sea of green rolling off into the distance reminded her of the grass seas of Essos where the Dothraki once roamed free. Even now, she had a small Dothraki retinue that followed her, but she knew many of the Khalasar were restless with this new life. Some whispered that the Dothraki yearned to roam again, that staying penned in one land felt unnatural. As she contemplated this, footsteps approached. It was Missandei, smiling softly. She bowed her head. "Your Grace, I wondered if you might like company." Daenerys gestured for her to sit. The two women had been through so much together, from the liberation of Slavers Bay to the siege of King's Landing. Now here they were, in the heart of the Reach, forging a new Westeros. Daenerys felt a swell of warmth for this loyal friend who had stood by her side. She reached out, taking Missandei's hand. "Thank you," Daenerys said quietly. "For everything. I've leaned on you more than I can count. And still, you remain steadfast." Missandei's eyes shone with affection. "You saved me from a life of chains, Daenerys. I will always be grateful. But more than that, you showed me a path to a better world." Daenerys squeezed her hand. "A better world," she echoed. "Sometimes it feels like a distant dream. Even now, with the throne secured, I see so many struggles ahead. The realm is vast and scarred. And Essos, there are still places there I left half-finished or worse." Missandei nodded. "One step at a time, Your Grace. We cannot mend everything at once, but we can work steadily. You've seen how hearts can change when you show them mercy and justice together." Daenerys looked across the garden. In the dying light, she imagined a realm where peasants didn't fear starvation each winter, where no child was sold into chains, where houses didn't slaughter one another for a crown. "I want that dream to be real," she said. "For the Seven Kingdoms, for Essos if possible. Grey Worm and some of the Unsullied are already sailing to Noth to help defend it. Perhaps that will be the start of something larger." Missandei smiled, though a hint of sadness touched her features. She missed Grey Worm deeply, and Daenerys knew it. But neither woman spoke of that pain. They simply watched the last rays of the sun dip below the horizon, each lost in her own thoughts about the future. Shortly after, Daenerys and her retinue departed Highgarden, winding northward toward the Riverlands. Along the way, they passed through villages that had been battlegrounds in earlier wars. Remnants of the War of the Five Kings, battles against the Lannisters, the Brotherhood without banners, and more. The Riverlands had known little peace for years. Bridges were burnt, farmland trampled, small folk displaced. Daenerys encountered peasants who had never heard of the Night King, never laid eyes on a dragon, and simply wished for the chance to plant crops without an army rolling through. She listened to their pleas, promising to station soldiers only where needed to maintain order, and to let them farm in peace. On the horizon, Riverrun rose, the seat of House Tully. Edmure Tully, once held captive by the Freys, had reclaimed his ancestral seat after the Freys fell from power. Arya Stark's lethal handiwork at the Twins was still whispered of with awe and dread. Daenerys arrived to find the Tully banners flying proudly over the walls, a sign that Edmure had re-established some measure of authority. He greeted Daenerys with a bow, though she saw the wariness in his eyes. He had been burned by the Lannisters and uncertain alliances before. Yet he recognized that if Sansa Stark had accepted Daenerys, the Tullys could perhaps trust her as well. Daenerys stayed there for a brief interval, hearing from local fishermen about how the war had driven them from the rivers, from farmers who needed new plows and seeds. Tyrion noted that if they diverted certain trade routes, The Riverlands could once again serve as a central hub for goods traveling between the North, the Westerlands, and the Crownlands. Daenerys found herself warming to the idea. A stable Riverlands meant stability for half the realm. She pledged resources, including a minimal garrison of Unsullied to protect against bandit raids, but stressed that she wanted no further displacements of local folks. Edmure seemed tentatively relieved, though he remained cautious. The scars of conflict ran deep. From Riverrun, the Queen's progress turned east, heading back toward the capital. The journey had lasted months, and autumn was slowly creeping in. Fields wore shades of gold and russet. Leaves began to turn on the trees, and the nights carried a sharper chill. Daenerys felt a new sense of perspective, having seen the scope of her realm and the challenges it faced. She had forged alliances, soothed old wounds, and offered hope. Yet the burden weighed heavily on her. She thought often of the long night, how she had been tested by a threat that overshadowed even the petty squabbles of lords. Now she navigated a realm at peace, but that peace was fragile. She needed to be vigilant. Upon returning to King's Landing, she found that reconstruction had advanced notably in her absence. The main avenues had been cleared, the Red Keep's damaged towers reinforced. The Dragonpit project had begun, with masons working to shore up the crumbling domes and expand certain sections to accommodate the 3 living dragons. A new spirit of enterprise seemed to animate the city. Markets bustled with fresh produce from the Reach, fish from Blackwater Bay, and crafts from across the Crownlands. Street performances and singers took to the squares once more. Some ballads praised the Dragon Queen, who spared the city from an inferno, though others quietly recounted the terror of seeing dragons overhead. Daenerys listened to these mixed songs without anger. She understood that fear did not vanish overnight. Her council welcomed her with a mixture of relief and excitement. Tyrion had negotiated new trade agreements with Essos, specifically the ports of Pentos and Volantis, which recognized the value of dealing amicably with the new regime in Westeros. Varys reported that would-be rebellions in the Westerlands and Stormlands had quieted, at least for now, as lords saw the futility of opposing 3 dragons and a unified realm. Missandei relayed messages from Dorne, indicating that the new prince or princess of Dorne, who styled themselves as part of House Martell's extended line, was open to an alliance so long as Dorne's independence was respected in cultural matters. Daenerys, recalling the complicated history of Dorne and its partial autonomy under previous Targaryen kings, signaled her willingness to allow them greater local governance, provided they remained loyal to the crown in the broader sense. In the weeks that followed, Daenerys took careful steps toward forging something akin to a representative assembly. She convened lords from each major region, but also extended invites to a few chosen commoners, guild leaders, septons, and other influential voices. Some lords balked at the inclusion of small folk in councils, but Daenerys stood firm, insisting that the realm belonged to all. Progress was halting. She discovered that centuries of feudal tradition could not be undone in a single meeting. But each time the council gathered, she saw a glimmer of possibility that the realm might be governed more equitably. Amid these political endeavors, personal matters grew pressing. Rumors swirled about Daenerys and Jon's relationship, especially now that knowledge of Jon's Targaryen heritage had slipped beyond a few confidants. Some lords whispered that if the queen truly wanted to secure her dynasty, she should marry Jon and unite their claims under one banner. Others feared the union, believing it might yield a return of Targaryen excess or overshadow the rights of other great houses. Daenerys and Jon themselves spoke little of marriage, though their affection was plain to those who saw them together. Both carried scars, Daenerys from a life of exile and warfare, Jon from betrayal and duty that had shaped him since he was a boy. Love was not something they took lightly. One evening in the Red Keep, after another long council session, Jon found Daenerys pacing in a small garden near the royal apartments. Torchlight cast shifting patterns on the walls. The fragrance of night-blooming flowers offered a moment of respite from the day's arguments. He approached quietly, watching her expression, intense, brooding, as though her mind roiled with 1,000 plans. "Daenerys," he said softly, drawing her attention. She turned, her violet eyes reflective in the flickering glow. He stepped closer, reaching for her hand. "You seem troubled," she exhaled. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm pulling this realm together or holding it at the seams by force of will. Every day, new demands, old grudges, and the lords push me about marriage. They want security, an heir, something tangible they can rally behind. But I refuse to be a broodmare for politics. Jon squeezed her fingers gently. You're a queen, not a pawn. If we ever wed, it should be because we choose it freely, not because the realm demands it. Her lips curved faintly, though sadness lingered in her eyes. I know you mean that, but the realm might not understand. They see Targaryen blood in us both and imagine it must be sealed into a single line. I don't want to repeat my family's mistakes. Jon's grip tightened. You are not your ancestors, and I am not my father, whoever he truly was. Our choices are our own. She studied his face. In the dancing shadows, she saw honesty, the same sincerity that had drawn her to him on the fields of the long night. If I ever take that step, she said quietly, it would be for love, for the unity we share, not to appease lords who see me as a broodmare. I won't let them reduce me to that. Jon nodded, an undercurrent of relief in his stance. I feel the same. They lingered in that garden, speaking in low voices about everything, from the future of the dragons to the daily needs of the small folk. Each time their gazes met, there was a warmth that belied the chaos around them. For all the realm's demands, they found a pocket of peace in each other's presence. In that fleeting moment, the burdens of queenship and kingship slipped away, replaced by two people who had risked everything for each other, who had fought side by side against the dead and lived to shape a new world. As the seasons continued shifting toward autumn, Daenerys organized a great gathering in King's Landing, a harvest festival meant to celebrate the realm's first significant season of peace in years. She hoped it would allow lords and small folk alike to mingle, to taste the bounty of the fields, and to see the capital not just as a seat of power but as a place of shared culture. Musicians were hired from every region, vendors set up stalls offering spiced wine, honeyed breads, roasted meats, and sweet treats. The city's squares filled with color and laughter. Children laughed at puppet shows, while traveling mummers performed comedic plays poking gentle fun at lords and knights. Daenerys made a point of walking through the crowds. She wore simpler attire than usual, a flowing gown of midnight blue, her hair half-braided in the Dothraki style. Unsullied guards flanked her at a discreet distance. People bowed or curtsied, but some dared approach, shyly offering gifts of fruit or small tokens. She accepted them with gratitude, careful to maintain humility. Jon accompanied her, still somewhat astonished at the idea of a festival so soon after the city's capture. But he saw how it lifted spirits, how it gave people a chance to look forward rather than backward. That night, after the festival's music had dwindled, Daenerys strolled by the docks. Lanterns swayed, casting shimmering patterns on the inky water. A warm breeze carried hints of brine. She reflected on how far she had come, from the girl sold to Khal Drogo to the liberator of Slavers Bay, the breaker of chains, the would-be conqueror of Westeros, and now the queen striving to be just. Her gaze turned upward toward the stars. Somewhere out there in the darkness, Essos lay, a world she had also tried to save. Here, in Westeros, she was forging a new way. It was daunting, but she felt that, at last, she was taking steps that honored the best parts of her lineage, not just the name Targaryen, but the spirit of mercy and resolve she had learned through hard experience. She sensed a presence behind her and turned to see Sansa Stark. The Lady of Winterfell approached, her auburn hair reflecting the lantern glow. It was rare for the two of them to be alone together. Their initial interactions had been rife with mistrust. Sansa dipped her head in greeting, her expression neither hostile nor particularly warm, somewhere in neutral territory. Daenerys offered a polite nod. Enjoying the festival? Daenerys asked softly. Sansa's lips formed a slight curve, not quite a smile. It's good to see the city alive again. I never thought I'd see so much laughter in these streets. Daenerys turned back toward the water. We have a chance to make this a lasting peace, if we can keep the lords from tearing each other apart over old feuds. Sansa stepped forward, her gaze lingering on a passing boat. Peace has always been tenuous in Westeros. But you've done what many thought impossible. You united the realm against the dead, and then you took King's Landing without turning it into a graveyard. Daenerys felt a flicker of gratitude. She understood praise did not come easily from Sansa. I've done what I could, she said, though I know not everyone will forgive the manner in which I claimed the throne. Sansa folded her hands. True, but they'll see in time that you're not your father. A pause drifted between them. At length, Sansa spoke again, her tone cautious. For what it's worth, I respect your commitment to rebuilding. Jon believes in you wholeheartedly. Arya seems to tolerate you well enough. Bran, well, Bran is Bran. She let out a soft laugh. That might be the best we can hope for with him. Daenerys allowed herself a small smile. I value their counsel. The Starks have proven themselves time and time again. Sansa studied her. You've changed, Daenerys Targaryen. When you arrived in Winterfell, I saw a conqueror. Now I see a ruler. Let's hope the realm follows suit. Before Daenerys could reply, Sansa gave a slight dip of her head and moved on, leaving Daenerys by the lanternlit docks, thoughtful. Perhaps the final barriers of mistrust between them had begun to erode. That alone felt like a victory worth savoring. The next morning, Daenerys awoke to alarming news. A sudden riot had broken out in Flea Bottom overnight, triggered by a rumor that the city guard was confiscating grain. Several shops were looted, a handful of guards injured. Daenerys immediately called for her council and ordered the commander of the city watch to investigate. She learned that unscrupulous merchants had tried to hoard supplies, driving up prices. The watch intervened, confiscating the hidden stores to redistribute at fair prices. In turn, rumors spread that this was a royal crackdown on small folk. Enraged and hungry, the crowd lashed out. Daenerys, seeing the potential for chaos, rode personally into Flea Bottom with a contingent of Unsullied. Rather than brandish her dragons, she arrived on horseback, calmly explaining through a herald what had happened. She promised that any merchant caught hoarding vital supplies would be punished, but that the watch was acting in the people's interest. The tension slowly ebbed, though pockets of resentment remained. After ensuring calm was restored, Daenerys directed that an official storefront be established in Flea Bottom where grain and essentials could be sold at regulated prices. It was a stopgap measure, but it prevented further exploitation of the poor. The common folk muttered among themselves, uncertain whether to resent or thank her, yet they could not deny that her swift action had averted greater violence. Incidents like that reminded Daenerys that the realm's healing was far from complete. Every time she thought progress was steady, a new threat or misunderstanding emerged. Yet she persevered, supported by her council and sustained by the knowledge that the realm was, overall, better off than it had been under Cersei's harsh rule. Jon's presence, too, proved vital. He had a calming influence on people, a sense of honesty and honor that even southern folk came to recognize. Together, they navigated the complicated waters of leadership. Time wore on. The crisp air of autumn gave way to winter's approach once more, though the maesters predicted it would be a milder winter after the defeat of the Night King. Daenerys' efforts to fortify food stores across the realm proved prudent. There were no reports of mass starvation, though some areas struggled more than others. She expanded trade routes, forging ties with Bravos and Lys, and welcomed ships from the Summer Islands. Occasionally, an envoy from Volantis or Karth arrived, bearing exotic goods. The city of King's Landing began to resemble its old self, a vibrant hub where cultures mixed and deals were struck. But this time, the face of power had changed. Gone were the Lannister lions from the gates. In their place, Targaryen banners featuring three-headed dragons caught the breeze. One night, in the great hall that had been partly restored, Daenerys hosted a feast for her supporters and the ambassadors from across Westeros. The high table was laden with roasted boar, pheasant stuffed with herbs, trenchers of thick stew, fresh loaves of bread, and flagons of wine. Musicians plucked lively tunes, and the echoes of laughter bounced off newly rebuilt arches. Sansa, Arya, Tyrion, Davos, Gendry, Edmure Tully, representatives from Dorne, Yara Greyjoy, all were present, among others. Daenerys and Jon sat side by side, greeting guests, exchanging pleasantries, occasionally laughing at Tyrion's jests. The mood was one of cautious celebration, a testament to the unity they had forged. Halfway through the evening, when cups had been refilled more than once, Tyrion rose to propose a toast. He tapped his goblet with a spoon, drawing attention. The music quieted. Conversations hushed. "My lords and ladies," Tyrion said, his voice carrying through the hall, "we are here tonight because of a remarkable journey, one that began with a queen determined to end tyranny and a realm weary of war. We owe our peace to Daenerys Storeborn of the House Targaryen, first of her name, breaker of chains, mother of dragons." He offered a small flourish of his hand. "I've served as her hand, and sometimes I've wondered if she would set me on fire for my many blunders. Yet she has shown mercy, not just to me but to all of Westeros. Let us raise our cups to the queen who, through trials of ice and fire, has chosen to spare rather than destroy." A wave of cheers and raised cups followed. Daenerys felt heat rise in her cheeks, whether from the wine or the gratitude. She stood, extending her own cup. "Thank you, Lord Tyrion," she said, her voice firm yet warm. "But I have not walked this path alone. I have been guided, corrected, and supported by friends, allies, and even former foes who realized our realm is stronger together. Your presence here reminds me that we can set aside old enmities when faced with something greater, a chance for peace. So I raise my cup to all of you and to the realm we shall strive to protect." Applause rippled through the hall. Jon, sitting beside her, inclined his head with a small smile. She wondered in that moment if he was thinking of the north, of Winterfell's godwood, of the oath he had once sworn to her. For a fleeting instant, she imagined a future where their children might run through the corridors of the Red Keep or the halls of Winterfell, free of the burdens that had weighed so heavily upon them. The thought made her heart ache with a tenderness she rarely allowed herself to indulge. Later, as the feast wound down, Daenerys slipped away for fresh air. She stepped onto a balcony overlooking the city. Flickering lanterns dotted the streets below, and the moon cast a silver path across Blackwater Bay. The hush of the night contrasted with the merriment inside. She let herself breathe, recalling all the heartbreak and triumph that had led her here. A familiar voice reached her ear. "Daenerys." She turned to see Jon stepping out onto the balcony. The torchlight from inside cast warm shadows on his features. She smiled softly. "Escaping the feast already, Jon?" He shrugged. "Too many lords wanting to talk of taxes and trade routes." "If I have to smile and nod one more time," his words trailed off in a playful grimace. She chuckled. "I know the feeling. But it's necessary, isn't it? For them to see we're listening." Jon came to her side, resting his hands on the balcony's edge. "Yes, it is. But sometimes I long for the simplicity of the wall. There, it was life and death, clear choices. No politics." Daenerys tilted her head. "You once told me you had no desire to be a ruler. Yet here you are, a king in all but name." Jon's gaze met hers, a quiet intensity lingering in his eyes. "I told you I bent the knee because I believed in you. That hasn't changed. Let the lords call me what they will. I follow you because it's right." She lowered her voice. "And if the realm insists we unite in marriage, do you still follow me then? Not as a duty, but as a choice." His breath caught. The silence between them was charged. Finally, he spoke, voice steady but laced with emotion. "It would be my choice, Daenerys. Always." The night breeze tugged at her hair, lifting silver strands around her face. She took a step closer, her pulse thudding. "Jon," she began, "I've tried to be cautious to ensure we don't repeat the mistakes of House Targaryen's past. But you and I, we've walked through fire and ice together. I see a future with you, one built on trust, not fear." He lifted a hand, gently cupping her cheek. The warmth of his skin against hers made the world narrow to just the two of them. "I love you, Daenerys. Not because I share your bloodline, but because of who you are. Strong, compassionate, determined to make this realm a better place." She leaned into his touch. "Then let us shape that future. We can choose when and how to formalize this bond. But know that my heart is already yours." Under the moonlit sky, they shared a quiet embrace, the city stretched out below them like a tapestry of possibilities. For all the trials yet to come, they found solace in each other, two souls tempered by the crucible of war and united by a purpose beyond crowns and titles. In the days that followed, Daenerys and Jon did not publicly announce an engagement, but the nature of their closeness became undeniable. Rumors abounded, some claimed a wedding was imminent, others insisted they were already secretly wed. Daenerys ignored the speculation, focusing on governance. She was content to let their relationship grow at its own pace, unhurried by the demands of others. Meanwhile, she continued refining her vision for the realm. She wrote decrees regulating the sale of grain and other staples, hoping to prevent another flea bottom riot. She appointed honest reeves to oversee taxes in each region, ensuring funds went to the crown's rebuilding projects rather than into the pockets of corrupt officials. She convened the assembled lords once more, discussing the potential for a uniform legal code across Westeros. It was an ambitious concept, each region had its own customs, but Daenerys believed a shared foundation of laws might reduce feuds and miscarriages of justice. The debate was lively, with many older lords balking at the idea of change. Yet she persisted, encouraging careful, incremental steps. As winter's chill grew, the city prepared for the colder months. Daenerys commanded that any who could not afford shelter would be allowed to camp in certain designated areas near the walls, where the crown would provide food and warmth. It wasn't an ideal solution, but it prevented the worst suffering. In the Red Keep, fires burned in grand hearths, and the halls echoed with the footfalls of courtiers and servants. Despite the relative peace, Daenerys felt restless. She knew from experience that peace was fragile. Would more challengers appear? Would Essos demand her attention again? And what of the Dothraki, many of whom yearned for the open plains? Her concerns were punctuated one frosty morning when riders arrived from the Iron Islands bearing a message from Yara Greyjoy. Pirates unaffiliated with the Ironborn had taken to plundering trade ships in the Western Sea, ambushing merchant vessels that carried goods bound for King's Landing. Yara suggested sending a royal fleet to patrol those waters. Tyrion argued that dedicating too many ships would leave the eastern coast vulnerable. Daenerys found herself pulled into another strategic puzzle. She decided on a measured approach. Dispatch a handful of reliable ships under a loyal commander to secure the most trafficked trade routes, coordinating with Yara's own fleet. It was a compromise that satisfied no one entirely, but hopefully staved off immediate disasters. Such was the nature of ruling, a series of decisions that balanced risk and reward, shaped by the harsh lessons Daenerys had learned. The dragons remained a potent symbol of her power. Occasionally, she flew Drogon across the skies to remind the realm that the queen was watchful. Rhaegal and Viserion also patrolled, sometimes bearing Jon or a trusted Dothraki rider, though their flight patterns were carefully planned to avoid frightening villages unnecessarily. One afternoon, as the sky hung pale and cold, Daenerys stood in the partially restored dragon pit alongside a group of masons and engineers. They were debating how best to reinforce the roof so it could safely enclose all 3 dragons without risk of collapse. The plan was not to imprison them but to create a structure where they could roost comfortably and be tended by keepers who had been learning from Daenerys' experiences. As she listened to the technical discussion about arches and flying buttresses, she felt a strange surge of pride. The Targaryens of old had built this pit as a symbol of dominion. She wanted it to be a symbol of coexistence, humans and dragons united in purpose. A distant roar echoed through the crumbling arches. Drogon was nearby, gliding low over the city. The masons paused, faces pale at the primeval sound reverberating through stone. Daenerys simply closed her eyes for a moment, letting that roar wash over her. Once, she had been a frightened girl with no home, sold into marriage. Now, she was a queen, a mother of dragons, forging a new destiny for the realm. The weight of it all pressed upon her, but she bore it with a resilience she had not known herself capable of in younger days. When the meeting concluded, Daenerys stepped out into the open air. Her breath plumed in the cold. Tyrion was waiting for her, scribbling something on a parchment. At her approach, he tucked his quill behind his ear. "I've just received more news from Dorne," he said. "They wish to host you in Sunspear come spring. A chance to finalize a new treaty of mutual defense and trade. It could be a valuable show of goodwill." Daenerys nodded. "I'll consider it. Dorne's independence has always been a tricky matter. But if they're willing to stand with the crown, I see no reason to deny them local freedoms." Tyrion offered a thin smile. Spoken like a ruler who understands the difference between control and cooperation. Then his expression grew more serious. A letter also arrived from Essos, specifically from Volantis. The Triarchs are proposing a formal alliance with the crown, citing shared trade interests and a desire to secure shipping lanes. It might be an opportunity to stabilize the region or a trap. "Volantis hasn't always been a friend to those who free slaves. We must tread carefully." Daenerys' jaw tightened. She recalled the uneasy alliance she once struck with certain powerful factions in Essos, how quickly they could turn. Yet ignoring them entirely could lead to an emboldened slave trade. "Draft a response, Tyrion. Express cautious interest, but make it clear we do not condone slavery. If they want alliances, they accept that principle." He bowed slightly. "As you command." She headed back toward the Red Keep, her thoughts churning. The realm might be unified under her banner, but the world beyond still held complexities. Would she ever be free of such entanglements? Probably not. If she had learned one thing, it was that leadership demanded constant vigilance. Yet, for the sake of the realm she ruled, and the ideals she carried, she would persist. She remembered the oath she had once made to herself. Break the wheel. A wheel that crushed the poor, that pitted families against one another for a crown of swords. Perhaps she couldn't shatter it all at once, but she could unmake it piece by piece, forging a realm where justice mattered more than birthright. Deep in winter, snow fell lightly across King's Landing, dusting the rooftops and turning the fields beyond the walls into a patchwork of white and brown. It was nothing like the heavy snows of the north, but for many in the capital, it was a rare and wondrous sight. Daenerys wandered through the courtyard, breath curling from her lips, remembering her first arrival in the north. The crisp air, the biting chill, the mistrustful stares of northerners. Now here she was, queen of a realm that stretched from Dorne to the Wall, with 3 living dragons and an alliance that spanned once hostile houses. Her footprints left a trail in the thin snow. She paused by a brazier, warming her hands. Jon found her there, wearing a heavy cloak lined with fur, his dark curls drifting in the breeze. "You know," he said softly, "the Northerners would laugh at us calling this winter." She smiled faintly. "I'm aware, but it's enough to remind me of Winterfell." He offered her his arm and they walked slowly around the courtyard. Guard patrols saluted. She nodded absently, mind still drifting. Sometimes, she confessed, I wish I could visit the far reaches of the realm without a retinue, see how people truly live without them bowing or trembling. Do you ever feel that way? He thought for a moment. I grew up as a bastard in Winterfell. No one bowed to me. I knew how the common folk lived, at least in the north. But now, yes, it's different. Everywhere I go, I'm king in the north or Aegon Targaryen or Daenerys' consort, depending on who you ask. That's not the same as being just. Jon. She tightened her arm around his. I suppose that's the cost of leadership, but I hope we never lose sight of who we were before crowns and titles. A moment later, a messenger approached, handing Daenerys a sealed scroll. She broke the wax, scanning it quickly. A raven from Winterfell, she murmured. Sansa has encountered a dispute among some northern lords about the boundaries of the Dreadfort's lands. She wants my input. Daenerys paused, a wry smile playing at her lips. It seems that despite our illusions of calm, the realm's petty quarrels continue. Hardly surprising. Jon exhaled. I can return to the north to mediate if needed. Daenerys shook her head. No. She specifically asks for my judgment as queen. It might be a test of my willingness to respect northern customs. Perhaps it's time I visited Winterfell again to show them I haven't forgotten their support. He nodded, though concern laced his features. We should prepare carefully. Some northerners are still unsure about you, especially the more traditional houses. She let out a soft laugh. I'm painfully aware. But if I rule all 7 kingdoms, I must meet them on their own ground. And if we're to unite truly, I should show them I value their traditions. Thus, plans were laid for a winter journey north. The roads would be icy and the distances great, but Daenerys felt a pull in that direction. She had, after all, faced the Night King alongside these people. She wished to honor the bond. She and Jon organized a small party, a contingent of Unsullied for protection, a handful of advisors, and supplies enough to manage the trip. The dragons, of course, would accompany them. Tyrion remained in King's Landing, entrusted with overseeing day-to-day governance. Sansa's letter made no mention of any immediate crisis, but Daenerys sensed it was both a summons and an invitation to prove her commitment. And so, on a cold morning under a pale sky, Daenerys set out once more. Drogon soared overhead, with Rhaegal and Viserion trailing behind. Snow drifted in lazy spirals as her caravan wound northward. The travelers passed through villages she had once ridden through in the heat of conquest, but now they were blanketed in white. The local folk watched her procession with wary respect. Word had spread of her mercy in King's Landing, and while they might not love a Targaryen queen, they did not curse her name. Many still revered Jon Snow, remembering him as the king in the north who had defended them from the horrors beyond the wall. When they finally reached Winterfell, it was near twilight. The ancient fortress rose from the snowy expanse like a sentinel of stone and frost. Smoke curled from chimneys and lanterns lit the walls. Sansa and Arya awaited them in the courtyard, cloaked in thick furs. Daenerys dismounted from her horse, handing the reins to an attendant. Snow crunched under her boots. Jon embraced his sisters, relief evident in his face. Daenerys nodded in greeting, offering a measured smile. Sansa stepped forward. Welcome back to Winterfell, Your Grace, she said formally, though there was a flicker of warmth in her tone. Daenerys inclined her head. Thank you, Lady Sansa. It's an honor to return. I'm grateful for your invitation. Sansa ushered Daenerys and her retinue inside. The great hall, though lit by torches and a roaring fire, carried a chill that reminded Daenerys how different the north truly was. Servants bustled about, bringing hot mulled wine and bowls of stew. Ghost, Jon's direwolf, padded in silently to greet his master. Jon knelt, ruffling the white fur, before rising to stand by Daenerys' side. I appreciate you coming so far, Sansa began, once they were seated near the fire. The matter with the Dreadfort might seem small from the outside, but these disputes can fester if left unaddressed. House Serwyn and House Manderly have conflicting claims, and they want the Queen's ruling. As for me, I've tried to mediate, but they insist on hearing from the Crown. Daenerys nodded. I'm here to listen. If possible, we'll find a fair solution. Arya, perched nearby with quiet intensity, sipped her wine. They'll test your resolve, she warned softly. Some of the northern lords have lost sons and fathers in the wars. They might still blame you in part or blame the South in general. Daenerys met Arya's gaze. I won't ignore their grievances, but I'll also remind them the war for the Dawn demanded all our courage. The North's bravery will never be forgotten, least of all by me. A faint nod was Arya's only response. Sansa smiled thinly, perhaps recalling the days when such a conversation would have been unthinkable. Daenerys Targaryen in Winterfell, speaking calmly of resolving local disputes. Time had changed them all. That night, Daenerys slept in one of the guest chambers, the chill seeping through the stone walls. Jon, out of courtesy for northern propriety, had his own room elsewhere, though they shared a brief moment of warmth before parting. Outside, the wind howled across the battlements. She remembered the bitter nights when the White Walkers lurked, and she felt a shiver not entirely due to the cold. The next morning, she rose early to greet the lords. Sansa had arranged a gathering in the Great Hall where House Serwyn's representative and House Manderly's, among others, would present their arguments. It felt almost surreal after all the battles and sieges she had endured. Here she was arbitrating a boundary dispute. Yet this was the essence of ruling. If she could not handle small matters, how could she claim to manage great ones? She took her seat at the high table. Jon sat beside her, Sansa to her other side. A hush fell as the lords entered. Each house brought its own documents, dusty genealogies, and sworn statements to prove their claim to a narrow strip of land near the Dreadfort. Daenerys listened patiently, occasionally asking questions. It struck her how passionate they were over a few leagues of snowy fields and a sluggish river, but she also understood it was about pride and survival. In the north, every scrap of farmland and every mile of territory could make the difference in feeding their people through long winters. At length, Daenerys conferred with Sansa, Jon, and a few local experts on northern law. She then delivered her ruling, a partition of the disputed land with a small additional concession of a fishing village to House Manderly and a symbolic payment of silver from House Manderly to House Serwyn in acknowledgement of old oaths. It was a compromise that left neither side completely satisfied but avoided further bloodshed. Some grumbled, but they could not deny the Queen had heard them. Daenerys insisted upon a written agreement, sealed by both houses, which she kept in the Winterfell records. When the meeting ended, she glimpsed a slight nod of approval from Sansa. Perhaps this was the beginning of a new pattern, the Queen's justice applied even in the north. Over the following days, Daenerys made a point of touring Winterfell's grounds, speaking with the garrison, acknowledging the hardships they had endured. She visited the crypts with Jon, paying her respects to the fallen Starks. The carved stone faces of past lords and ladies stared silently from the gloom. Jon lit a torch, casting flickering shadows on the walls. As they passed Lyanna Stark's tomb, Daenerys felt a pang, recalling how the revelation of Jon's parentage had nearly torn them apart. But they had persevered, forging a bond that transcended old secrets. They emerged into the frosty air of the Godwood, where the heart tree stood with its ancient face carved into white bark. Blood-red leaves rustled in the wind. Bran Stark sat there in his wheeled chair, gazing into the distance. He turned as they approached, his unblinking eyes seeming to see more than just the present moment. Daenerys had always found Bran's aura unsettling, as though he peered straight into her soul. "Hello, Bran," Jon said softly. Bran inclined his head. "Sister. Brother." He used the terms with a distant calm that sometimes made Daenerys' skin prickle. "You've returned to the north. It's good to see Winterfell remain strong." Daenerys tried a small smile. "We aim to keep it that way." Bran shifted his gaze to her. "You've changed the course of many lives, Daenerys Targaryen, and many futures. In another time, you might have lost everything to the Night King or to your own grief. But you have your dragons and you have your allies. You are forging a new path." The words sent a shiver through Daenerys. She recalled how close she had come to losing Viserion and Rhaegal, how easily she could have unleashed her wrath on King's Landing and repeated her father's sins. Yet something faith, love, or sheer fortune had guided her otherwise. She bowed her head in acknowledgement. "I hope this path leads to a better realm." Bran's lips curved in a faint, knowing smile. "The future is always in motion. Your choices shape it. If you remain true to your convictions, this realm may see an era of stability unlike any before." Daenerys blinked. She had grown accustomed to Bran's cryptic remarks, but they still left her unsettled. Jon placed a reassuring hand on her elbow. After another moment of silence, they left Bran to his meditations. That evening, a small feast was held in Winterfell's hall to mark Daenerys' visit. It was more subdued than the King's Landing gatherings, no elaborate tapestries or exotic foods. Instead, there was hot ale, roasted vegetables, hearty stews, and strong northern beer. The warmth of the hall's fires warded off the chill, and the air buzzed with conversation. Lords from neighboring holds had joined, curious to meet the Targaryen queen under less formal circumstances. Daenerys conversed politely, leaning on Jon's advice about northern customs. Some lords were stiff, but others, especially younger ones, seemed receptive to her sincerity. Toward the night's end, Arya approached Daenerys, a ghost of a smile on her lips. "You're different here than you were in King's Landing." Daenerys raised an eyebrow. "How so?" Arya shrugged. "Less guarded, maybe? Or more comfortable, which is strange given how cold it is. But I can see you care about what happens here. That's good. The North doesn't trust easily, but actions speak louder than words." Daenerys offered a hint of a smile in return. "I'm trying, Arya. I truly am. This realm has bled enough." Arya nodded, not one for flowery praise. She glanced around the hall. "Just remember, we Starks protect our own. If you keep your word to us, we'll stand by you. If you don't..." She didn't finish the sentence, but the meaning was plain. Daenerys took no offense. She admired Arya's frankness, even if it sometimes bordered on threat. When the time came for Daenerys to depart, she left Winterfell knowing she had made a small but tangible step toward mending the fractures between the North and the Crown. Sansa thanked her for coming, offering a fur-lined cloak as a parting gift, an unexpected gesture of respect. Daenerys accepted it gratefully. Jon lingered behind for a few days, tending to northern affairs, but soon rode south to rejoin her. Thus, the Queen's reign stretched onward. Each passing month brought new challenges, from minor rebellions in remote corners to negotiations with foreign cities. The dragons grew larger, their wings casting greater shadows across the land. Yet they also became symbols of hope. When Daenerys flew overhead, many looked up not in terror but in wary admiration, a sign that perhaps the Targaryen name was being redeemed. And through it all, Daenerys never forgot how close she had come to catastrophe, how Viserion could have been lost to the Night King, how Rhaegal could have perished to Euron's bolts, how rage could have consumed her after Missandei's near execution, or after so many betrayals. Those near misses shaped her determination to rule with both strength and mercy. She stood firm against those who sought to exploit the vulnerable, and she listened to the advisors who reminded her of compassion. The realm had known fire and blood for too long. Now, under a queen who bore the lessons of war and heartbreak in her heart, it found a chance, however tenuous, for unity. Across the narrow sea, whispers persisted of slavers regrouping, of new warlords rising in the chaos left by the death of the Night King. Some suggested Daenerys would eventually return to Essos, bringing her brand of justice to those lands once more. Others claimed she was done with that continent, focusing instead on the Seven Kingdoms. Daenerys herself did not speak of it openly. The weight of one realm was burden enough. She had learned not to scatter her attention too thinly. But in quiet moments, she remembered the freedmen who still looked to her as Mysa, the breaker of chains. If they called for her help again, could she truly refuse? Seasons passed in a blur of negotiations, council meetings, celebrations, and minor conflicts. The smallfolk prayed for good harvests and fewer wars. Daenerys's reforms, while far from perfect, began taking root. Over time, she established a rudimentary system of traveling magistrates, individuals trained in law and supported by local lords, ensuring that even remote villages received a semblance of fair trials. Some lords chafed at this intrusion, but Daenerys stood her ground, citing the realm's unity under the crown. All the while, her relationship with Jon deepened, though they kept it mostly private. They found small pockets of time to share a meal, a laugh, a ride on Dragonback. Rumors continued swirling about a royal wedding. Tyrion, ever pragmatic, pressed the issue gently, suggesting it might quell the last vestiges of discontent. Daenerys, however, remained firm. She would wed Jon when they both felt it was right, not as a tool to placate lords. One evening, late in the second year of her reign, Daenerys walked through the Red Keep's highest corridors, drawn by the moonlight pouring through narrow windows. She paused by a stone terrace, gazing at the sprawling city below. Lanterns glimmered along the wide thoroughfares. Far off, she could see the outlines of the dragon pit under repair. A gentle breeze carried the salt tang of the sea. She thought of all the souls in the city, merchants, bakers, blacksmiths, scribes, mothers and fathers, children, each living under her rule, hoping for peace and prosperity. Footsteps approached. She turned to find Jon there, wearing a thoughtful expression. Without words, he joined her, standing at the edge of the terrace, shoulders nearly brushing hers. Together, they looked out over the city that had once been her enemy's stronghold, now her capital. "It's quieter these days," he observed softly. "Fewer riots, no fires raging, no horns summoning armies." She nodded. "I'd like to think we're making progress. People are no longer terrified each time a dragon flies overhead." She glanced at him. Though I suspect fear will always linger, a reminder of what once was. Jon's hand found hers. Fear isn't always a bad thing. It keeps people respectful. But they also see you're not the tyrant they expected. You've earned something else from them, hope. Daenerys allowed herself a small, contented sigh. Hope, she echoed. It's fragile, and I must do everything I can to protect it. They stood there in silence, hands entwined, the city stretching beneath them like a living tapestry. Above, the moon and stars shimmered. Below, the distant murmur of life carried on, proof that peace, while never permanent, was at least within their grasp. A faint roar carried on the wind. Drogon, perhaps, patrolling the skies, or Rhaegal and Viserion chasing each other through the night. A reminder that even though Daenerys Targaryen was a queen of flesh and blood, she remained bound to creatures of fire and magic. She was a bridge between worlds, the old Valyrian bloodline that once subjugated Westeros and the new order that sought justice for all. Such a balance was precarious, but in that moment, as she stood with Jon under the moonlit sky, she believed it was worth every sacrifice. Together, they turned from the terrace, leaving the city to its well-earned rest. In the depths of her heart, Daenerys felt the pulse of determination that had guided her across seas and wars, heartbreak and triumph. She had lost nothing that day in the north to the Night King's spear, nor on the seas to Euron's scorpions. Instead, she had gained the chance to shape a realm free from the cruelties of the past. With 3 dragons still at her side and alliances forged in shared struggle, the realm stood at the dawn of a new age, one of measured hope, guided by the lessons of fire and blood, tempered by mercy, and steered by the unwavering spirit of a queen who refused to let history repeat its darkest chapters. Daenerys Targaryen stood on the ramparts of the Red Keep, gazing at the horizon where the first threads of dawn unwound across a slate-colored sky. It had been over 2 years since she ascended the Iron Throne, defeating Cersei Lannister and uniting the 7 kingdoms under her rule. In that time, she had come to learn the delicate push and pull of peace, how it could slip through one's fingers if not tended with vigilance and understanding. In the courtyard below, torches still burned in their sconces, the light flickering across the well-worn cobblestones. A mild frost crusted the edges of the stone, a reminder that winter still had a light hold on King's Landing, though nowhere near as fierce as the north. Daenerys could hear the distant movements of the city watch making their rounds, the occasional bark of a stray dog, the rustle of banners catching the morning breeze. As queen, she had grown used to the city's constant heartbeat. Yet each new day brought possibilities that both intrigued and worried her. She rested her hands on the cold stone parapet, reflecting on how far she'd come. Months earlier, she'd traveled to Winterfell and resolved a lingering boundary dispute between houses Manderly and Serwyn. There, she'd found a measure of acceptance from the northern lords, cautious but real. She'd returned to King's Landing and poured her energies into rebuilding projects, food distribution, trade agreements, and forging alliances. All these tasks left her little time for reflection, let alone leisure. Yet in the quiet moments, she allowed herself to sense pride. The realm was not perfect, nor would it ever be, but it was on a better path than she had found it. The dawn light strengthened, gilding the edges of the city with a pale glow. Below, the waters of Blackwater Bay lapped gently against the docks. Ships with foreign pennants, some from the Summer Islands, others from Volantis or Bravos, had arrived in the night, ready to unload their goods. As part of her reforms, Daenerys had lowered certain tariffs on essential commodities, hoping to keep prices stable and encourage trade. She believed in unity not only among the 7 kingdoms, but with the wider world. Perhaps a day would come when Westeros and Essos stood side by side in prosperity rather than separated by centuries of bloodshed and the hateful bonds of slavery. It was a hope that kept her working late into the night, drafting letters and conferring with Tyrion, Missandei, and Varys. Footsteps approached from behind, echoing softly on the worn stones of the rampart walkway. She turned to see Jon Snow wrapped in a thick woolen cloak against the chill. His dark hair brushed his shoulders, a few strands silvered by the faint sunlight. Despite their closeness, she always felt a small thrill at the sight of him, this man who had once been the king in the north, who was in truth Aegon Targaryen, yet remained, at heart, Jon Snow. "Up early," Jon said gently. He joined her at the parapet, gazing out over the awakening city. She offered a slight smile. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "Too many thoughts swirling in my head. These letters from Bravos, the reports from the Stormlands, the matter of the Stepstone's pirates, it all piles up." Jon nodded. "I was about to ride out and inspect some of the new farmland outside the city. The locals say that the soil near the Blackwater Rush has grown fertile again after the recent floods. Thought I might take Rhaegal for a quick flight. Care to join me?" Daenerys considered. A surge of longing for the open sky pulsed through her. She could picture Rhaegal, green as summer grass, roaring eagerly at the prospect of flight. Yet duties beckoned: her morning council meeting, a petition from several small folk concerning land disputes, and a delegate from Dorne expected to arrive by midday. "I wish I could," she said, a hint of regret in her voice. "But I've a full docket. Someone has to keep our dear lords from clawing each other's eyes out." Jon smirked. "Tyrion can manage them for a few hours, no?" Then his expression grew more serious. "Truly, Daenerys, you deserve to breathe. You're doing so much, trying to be everywhere at once." Her gaze softened as she reached out and laid a hand on his arm. "Thank you, Jon. But I'll have time later. After midday, perhaps. The wind might still be good for a short flight." He nodded, leaning in to press a gentle kiss to her temple. "Don't let them bury you in scrolls," he teased softly. Then he turned, cloak swirling, and walked away along the ramparts to descend to the courtyard below. She watched him go, feeling both warmed by his presence and weighed by the demands that made her stay behind. In time, she left the ramparts and made her way to the council chamber, where a round table awaited, scattered with maps, ledgers, and half-written parchments. Tyrion, already seated, sipped from a steaming cup of tea. Missandei and Varys stood nearby, conversing in low tones. Ser Davos was absent. He had departed a fortnight past on a mission to the Stormlands, ensuring Gendry's efforts to curb local raiders continued effectively. Grey Worm was in the courtyard, organizing the training rotations of the Unsullied. "Good morning, Your Grace," Tyrion said, putting down his cup. "We've had ravens from the Vale and from Bravos. Also, I'd hoped to discuss the matter of the Iron Islands. Yara requests permission to expand her patrols to combat rogue pirates near Pike." Daenerys inclined her head in greeting, taking her seat. "Let's start with Bravos," she said, folding her hands. "They've been cautious about forging ties with us." "What news now?" Varys stepped forward. "It seems the Sea Lord and key representatives from the Iron Bank are intrigued by your governance. The Iron Bank, of course, always invests where it sees profit and stability. They note that trade has improved since your ascension, as King's Landing is no longer locked in civil strife. They propose a mutual loan agreement, low interest rates, in exchange for certain trade privileges." Tyrion's brow furrowed. "We must be careful. The Iron Bank is formidable. The Lannisters learned that to their cost. If we're too indebted, they might think they can steer our policies. But a controlled relationship could help fund our rebuilding efforts. An injection of coin might accelerate road repairs, harbor expansions." Daenerys listened, tapping a finger on the table. "I'm not opposed to forging a relationship, but we must keep the realm's independence. I won't let them dictate how we govern." Missandei nodded in agreement. "I can draft a response that outlines our willingness to negotiate while emphasizing certain boundaries. Perhaps we can keep the arrangement focused on infrastructure projects, which would benefit trade on both sides." "Very well," Daenerys said. "Do that, Missandei. I'll review the letter before it's sent." Varys bowed slightly. "I'll keep my little birds attuned. Should the Iron Bank try to meddle, we'll know." Next came the reports from the Vale. Lord Robin Arryn had grown older, if not entirely wiser, and though his regents guided him, he'd begun to push for a more direct role in Vale governance. Some lords questioned his competence. Tensions simmered, but no open conflict yet. Tyrion sighed, rubbing his temple. "At least there's no immediate rebellion. Let's keep an eye on it. Sansa has a good rapport with the Vale, as the Eyrie aided the Starks during past wars. We might coordinate with her if Lord Arryn becomes problematic." Daenerys accepted this with a nod, then shifted her focus. "And the Iron Islands request from Yara?" Tyrion fished out a parchment. "She's complaining about pirate incursions again. Not all Ironborn are loyal to her, some remain Reavers at heart. She proposes expanding her patrols around the Isles, forcibly bringing independent captains to heel. She also wants a small contingent of the royal fleet for support. Nothing major, just enough to show the crown stands behind her." Daenerys considered. "If these Reavers plunder the seas, it undermines stability. Yara has pledged loyalty, and we owe her an alliance. But our navy isn't vast. We must keep watch on the Stepstone's pirates as well." Varys coughed lightly. "Might I suggest granting Yara partial support, but making it clear that the Iron Islands must handle the brunt of the conflict themselves? If we spread ourselves too thin, we risk leaving the Blackwater undefended." Daenerys placed her palms flat on the table. "I'll allow Yara to call upon a handful of crown ships, but no more than 5. Grey Worm will select the crews. That should suffice to show solidarity without compromising our other waters." Tyrion drafted the official reply. Tyrion jotted a note. "Consider it done." They spent the next hour discussing roads near Maidenpool, the city watch's need for additional training, and a potential trade pact with Karth. By the time they finished, Daenerys felt the familiar tug of exhaustion. Yet she also felt a sense of satisfaction. Bit by bit, the realm stabilized. The old feuds were not gone, but they no longer consumed the land in fire and blood. She stepped outside, letting the cooler air revive her. The morning sun had fully risen, setting the sky aflame with pale gold. Rhaegal circled high overhead, a speck of emerald in the distance. Perhaps Jon was indeed taking that flight. The thought made her smile. She wished she could join him in the sky. There was a sense of freedom up there that no throne room could match. Soon, she promised herself. A bustle of movement drew her eye. The courtyard gates opened to admit a small delegation from Dorne. Their sigil, a sun pierced by a spear, fluttered in the breeze. For riders dismounted, wearing flowing robes suitable for a warmer climate, Daenerys descended to meet them, flanked by 2 unsullied guards. She recognized one of the men, Cavo Ronis, a well-spoken official who had visited months prior to discuss trade routes across the Red Mountains. Beside him stood 2 women with copper-tanned skin and black hair, each wearing a veil of translucent fabric, and an older man whose bearing suggested nobility. "Welcome to King's Landing," she greeted them. "You've traveled far. I trust the roads treated you well." Cavo offered a bow, hand on heart. "Your Grace, it is an honor. The roads are improving, yes. We encountered only minor trouble with a band of outlaws near the Prince's Pass, but they fled at the sight of our guards." Daenerys nodded. "I'm glad to hear it. Come, we have refreshment waiting within." She gestured for them to follow her into the keep. As they walked, Cavo explained they bore letters from the Prince of Dorne, reaffirming friendship and seeking clarity on certain terms in the last trade agreement. The older man was Lord Nymer Ironwood, a highborn noble of Dorne who hoped to witness the negotiations personally. The 2 veiled women were Ironwood's daughters, perhaps there to learn diplomacy or simply accompany their father. Daenerys guided them to a receiving room with a long table. Servants brought chilled wine, bread, and fruit. The Dornish envoys sampled them politely. For the next several hours, they discussed the intricacies of border tolls along the Boneway, the possibility of Dorne sending shipments of citrus fruits and spices to King's Landing in exchange for certain iron goods. It was detail-laden, far from the glamour of riding a dragon into battle. Yet Daenerys found a strange satisfaction in it. She was forging ties with Dorne in a way that might outlast any war. No more would the realm's unity rely solely on fear or the sword. At midday, she excused herself briefly. "I'll have a meal prepared shortly," she told them. "We can resume after we've all had a chance to rest." The Dornishmen agreed, and servants led them to a side chamber. Daenerys left them in Missandei's capable hands while she walked out to the courtyard for fresh air. Jon had returned, his cloak flecked with dirt from the farmland. Rhaegal perched on a far parapet, occasionally letting out a rumbling growl. As Daenerys approached, Jon broke into a boyish grin. "How was the flight?" she asked, stepping close. He exhaled happily. "Exhilarating." Rhaegal enjoyed stretching his wings. "And the farmland, I saw new sprouts in fields that were barren last year. The farmers were grateful for the crown's help with seeds and plowshares." He studied her face. "You look tired." She shrugged. "Dorne brings its own complexities, but it's progress. We're finalizing trade terms that could benefit both sides. No one tried to kill me, so that's a good day." His grin faded into concern. "Let's find you some respite. Even a queen can take a moment to herself." He lifted a brow. "We could slip away to the library courtyard. The orange trees are blooming. Some from Dorne that took root here, ironically." She hesitated, mindful of her responsibilities, but the prospect of a short respite with Jon was too enticing. "Very well," she said, "but only for a while. I have to return to them soon." They strolled through a side passage, away from the bustle of the main courtyard, passing storerooms and a small guard station. The library courtyard was quieter, enclosed by high walls. Several orange trees grew in planters, their blossoms scattering fragrant petals across the stone. A fountain burbled softly in the center, adding a note of serenity. Daenerys inhaled the citrus scent, tension easing from her shoulders. She allowed Jon to guide her to a stone bench. They sat, the only sound the trickling water and the occasional whisper of leaves in the breeze. She found her gaze drifting to Jon, tracing the faint lines of worry near his eyes, the subtle scar on his cheek. It struck her how different life could have been if either of them had died in the Great War, or if she had lost her dragons. Yet here they were, shaping a future together. Sometimes, she murmured, I can scarcely believe how much has changed since I first landed at Dragonstone. Back then, I was so focused on conquest, on claiming my birthright. Now, I see the cost of war, the endless duties of peace. I wonder if I was naive. Jon shook his head gently. We were all naive in ways. I thought I could protect the North by bending the knee. I didn't realize I'd become part of something larger, your cause. Maybe that's what we needed. A queen who didn't just want a throne, but to build something better once she had it. She closed her eyes, resting her head briefly against his shoulder. There are days I question if I'm truly different from my father. If I had lost one more dragon, or if Missandei had been executed before my eyes. He placed a finger to her lips, silencing her. You chose mercy, he whispered. You kept your dragons. You listened to your advisors, to your heart. You're not the Mad King. She smiled faintly, letting him hold her for a moment. The warmth of his body seeped through her, a welcome contrast to the crisp air. The minutes slipped by and she reluctantly remembered her duties. She stood with a small sigh. I must go, she said softly. The Dornish delegates will be waiting. But thank you. Jon rose beside her. I'll walk you back. Then I have tasks of my own, something about the city watch wanting new uniforms. His wry tone made her laugh lightly. They left the peaceful courtyard, returning to the labyrinth of corridors and obligations. Daenerys felt steadier, as though a small corner of her spirit had been refreshed by their brief interlude. Back in the receiving room, she resumed negotiations with the Dornish party, concluding them by dusk. Both sides walked away with a sense of mutual benefit, a freer flow of goods, a reaffirmation of respect for Dornish self-rule, and an understanding that in times of crisis, Dorne would stand with the crown. After they departed, Daenerys lingered in the quiet chamber, letting the day's events wash over her. Later that evening, as torches glowed in the halls, a messenger arrived bearing a sealed letter from Winterfell. Daenerys recognized Sansa Stark's precise handwriting. She broke the seal with care, scanning the page. It spoke of a minor bandit issue near the last hearth, the need for additional men to patrol the area, and a polite inquiry about when Daenerys might next visit the north. Beneath Sansa's formal tone, Daenerys sensed a guarded cordiality. Their relationship had come a long way. She penned a reply, promising to send a small detachment of Unsullied and acknowledging she could travel north again within a few moons if pressing matters did not interfere. She tried to maintain a respectful tone. Sansa was Lady of Winterfell, after all, and the north was unlike any other region. Once finished, Daenerys stretched her arms, her muscles stiff from hours at the desk. She changed into a comfortable robe of dark velvet and padded across the chilly stones to her bedchamber. A lone candle flickered on the bedside table. The shadows danced across the tapestry of old Targaryen kings behind the bed. Sometimes she found it unsettling to sleep under those watchful, embroidered eyes, a legacy of ancestors who had both shaped and scarred the realm. She thought of Rhaenyra Targaryen, of Aegon the Conqueror, of Viserys II, and all the others. They had once commanded dragons, forged alliances, and raised kingdoms. And now here she was, continuing the line in a more hopeful manner. She prayed. Settling into the bed, she closed her eyes, letting the day's weight slip away. Soon enough, she drifted into a restless sleep, filled with flickers of dragons soaring over a calm sea, their reflections dancing in the water below. Weeks passed in a blur of governance and subtle shifts. The days grew warmer, suggesting the tail end of winter's hold. Daenerys found herself increasingly focused on the stepstones, where rumors indicated pirates had grown bolder. They'd attacked merchant vessels bearing grain from the Reach, burning some and seizing cargo from others. Indignant lords pressed for swift retaliation while merchants clamored for the crown's protection. One bright afternoon, Daenerys convened her closest advisors to discuss the stepstones problem. They gathered in the small council chamber. Tyrion, Varys, Missandei, Grey Worm, Jon, and Ser Davos, newly returned from the Stormlands. Maps lay spread across the table, depicting the chain of rocky islands notorious for pirates and smugglers. Ser Davos, arms folded across his chest, wore a grave expression. I know these waters well, your grace. The stepstones have always been a haven for outlaws. When the crown is weak, pirates flourish. They see your new reign as untested on the seas. Tyrion tapped a finger on the map. We have a decent royal fleet, but not enough to scour every island. And the pirates are cunning. They hide in coves, dart out to raid ships, and vanish. Grey Worm's face remained impassive. Our Unsullied are strong on land, but we have fewer marines. The Dothraki cannot help on water. We must approach carefully. Or consider using the dragons. Daenerys considered, arms resting on the table's edge. An aerial assault by dragons might scare them off for a time, but they could scatter only to regroup once we leave. I don't want to commit dragons permanently to patrolling the stepstones. We need a longer-term solution. Jon leaned forward. What if we form a temporary alliance with the free cities that trade heavily through these waters? Bravos, Pentos, even Lys. They have ships and interests in safe routes. If we combine forces, it might be enough to hunt down these pirates. Varys inclined his head. A shrewd suggestion. Most free cities despise unchecked piracy that threatens their commerce. If we propose a joint naval effort, perhaps the Triarchs of Volantis or the Sea Lord of Bravos would lend warships. However, we must be cautious not to appear dependent on them. Daenerys exhaled slowly. All right, let's send envoys to the major trading powers. Emphasize the shared threat. In parallel, I'll dispatch part of our fleet, perhaps led by someone with naval experience. Ser Davos, are you willing to oversee this mission? Davos gave a measured nod. I'll do my best, Your Grace. I've navigated those waters 100 times. We'll chase the pirates from their hiding holes, but we'll need patience. It could take months. She appreciated his calm realism. Then gather your crews, choose your ships. Keep me informed. Grey Worm will provide you with a few detachments skilled in boarding actions. Tyrion, coordinate with the free cities. Let's see if we can craft a coalition. Thus began the preparations for a campaign in the Stepstones. Over the next few weeks, galleys were outfitted, sailors recruited, and provisions loaded. Davos handpicked captains he trusted, some of them reformed smugglers who knew the region intimately. Missandei drafted letters for the free cities, and Daenerys sealed them with the royal sigil, hoping for a swift response. During this flurry of activity, Daenerys remembered to delegate lesser tasks to subordinates, leaving her time to address new issues that bubbled up, lords from the Westerlands squabbling over a gold mine's ownership, the necessity to rebuild a crumbling bridge on the Rose Road, tensions between certain Dothraki outriders and local farmers near the King's Road, and so on. Ruling, she realized, was a never-ending tapestry of minor crises woven around grander concerns. A single day's agenda might ricochet from pirate raids to orchard disputes. Jon remained her steadfast partner in this. While not officially titled king, many still saw him as the co-ruler, a Targaryen with the North's loyalty. Whenever Daenerys found herself overwhelmed, she could rely on Jon to take on certain burdens or to offer an earnest perspective rooted in his sense of honor. She wondered if the time had come to formalize their bond. Marriage would cement their unity in the eyes of the realm. Yet she held back, uncertain if she wanted to add yet another layer of expectation and complexity to her reign. For now, their love remained a private foundation beneath the weight of crowns. At last, the fleet under Davos departed King's Landing in a fanfare of flapping sails and cheering crowds. Daenerys and Jon stood on a pier, watching the ships slip into the shimmering waters of Blackwater Bay. Davos stood at the prow of the lead galley, exchanging a salute of farewell. The sun glinted off the waves, reminding Daenerys of the day she had crossed the narrow sea to claim her birthright. Now she was sending others to secure the realm's seas. She felt a pang of anxious hope. Weeks rolled by as word trickled back of skirmishes near the Stepstones. Davos's fleet engaged in cat-and-mouse battles with pirates, capturing or sinking several raider ships. The free cities responded with cautious interest. Bravos sent 2 war galleys, Pentos offered 1, while Lys remained non-committal. The combined force grew modestly, though nowhere near large enough to dominate the entire region. Still, the presence of a coordinated flotilla signaled that the era of easy pickings was over. Amid these distant developments, life in King's Landing continued. The city watch kept order, the markets bustled, and Daenerys presided over courts where commoners and lords alike pleaded their cases. She found small joys in greeting foreign ambassadors, discussing the city's architecture, or riding Drogon at dusk, streaking the sky with the dragon's roar. She noticed the changes in her dragons as well. Drogon had grown in both size and cunning, more sure of his domain. Rhaegal carried himself with a quieter pride, while Viserion, recovered from earlier wounds, often flew in playful arcs, testing his agility. One balmy afternoon, Sansa Stark arrived unexpectedly at King's Landing. She brought a handful of northern soldiers and a retinue of attendants. Daenerys, though surprised, welcomed her graciously. Over a supper of roast lamb, fresh bread, and fragrant stewed vegetables, Sansa explained her visit. The north faced a small but concerning influx of travelers from Essos claiming to be refugees. Some might be legitimate, fleeing conflict across the sea, but others seemed suspicious. Sansa suspected smugglers or worse might be slipping in under false pretenses. Daenerys frowned thoughtfully. I've heard rumors of unrest in some free cities, especially Mir and Tyrosh. But are they truly crossing into the north in large numbers? Sansa nodded. They seem to arrive by ships docking at White Harbor, or else they skirt the Vale. I've no proof of malicious intent, but I'd rather not risk a Trojan horse situation. The north is still healing. Tyrion, present at the meal, sipped wine. We could coordinate with White Harbor. Lord Wyman Manderley is loyal. If these arrivals are genuine refugees, we can process them, perhaps help them settle. If not, we root out criminals. Sansa's expression remained stoic. Precisely. But I came in person to request your support, Your Grace. The North will handle much of the screening, but we might need resources, food, clothes, or even some unsullied for border patrols. Daenerys understood the subtext. Sansa had come to treat her as a partner, not an enemy. She inclined her head. You shall have my support. White Harbor is a key port. I'll instruct Grey Worm to dispatch a contingent to assist in security matters. And we can send surplus grain from the Crownlands if needed. For a moment, Sansa's carefully guarded face softened. Thank you, she said quietly. The North remembers who aided us in the darkest hours. We won't forget your help now. They spent the following days ironing out details. Sansa also attended Daenerys' small council sessions, occasionally offering insights about trade routes or the temperament of various northern lords. Missandei's observation was that Sansa was learning the art of broader governance, not just in the north. Daenerys, for her part, valued the synergy. Though they were very different women, both had endured trials and heartbreak, forging steel in their spirits. Jon, of course, was pleased to see Sansa. He spent time with her discussing Winterfell's repairs, the reorganization of the Northern Watch, and the new orchard expansions near the castle. Sometimes Daenerys caught them speaking quietly in corners, their faces serious. She suspected Jon was gently pressing Sansa to maintain an open mind toward Daenerys' reign. Sansa, in turn, wanted reassurance that the crown would not overshadow the North's identity. On the final evening before Sansa departed, a small feast was held. Music played softly and the conversation turned lighter. It was in that relaxed atmosphere that Tyrion, slightly tipsy, brought up a topic many had been tiptoeing around, the question of Daenerys and Jon's marriage. He did so with a grin, raising his goblet. You know, he said, his words measured but playful, I cannot walk 2 steps in the city without hearing rumors of a royal wedding. Some say it's already happened in secret. Others say it's imminent. I, for one, am tired of the speculation. He cast a sly glance at Daenerys and Jon. Care to enlighten us? A hush fell. Daenerys felt her cheeks warm. Jon, equally caught off guard, cleared his throat. Around them, eyes swiveled expectantly. Sansa's, Missandei's, Grey Worm's, even Varys's cool stare. Daenerys and Jon had never formally announced their intentions. They were content to let their partnership speak for itself. But perhaps it was time to address the realm's curiosity. Daenerys set her goblet down gently. We have not wed, she said, her tone clear. Jon and I share a bond forged in war and in trust. We support each other's rule. For now, that suffices. Tyrion arched a brow. For now. Jon shifted slightly. We're focused on stabilizing the 7 kingdoms. A formal alliance between us is possible, even likely. But we haven't decided on the timing. His eyes flicked to Daenerys and she could sense the unspoken conversation. Are we ready? Sansa's face revealed a hint of tension. She parted her lips as though to speak, then closed them again. Missandei, sensitive to the atmosphere, interjected diplomatically. The realm sees you as partners already. But there is something to be said for a public declaration that unites the Targaryen and Stark lines. Daenerys inclined her head, acknowledging the point. It's not off the table, she said simply. Then she let the topic slide, shifting conversation to the Stepstones campaign. Tyrion offered no further prodding, though Daenerys could practically hear his wheels turning. That night, after the feast, she walked with Jon through the dim corridors of the Red Keep. Servants snuffed out candles behind them and a hush settled. Jon spoke quietly. I've never cared for ceremony. The thought of a grand wedding, people gawking, expecting this or that, it unnerves me. She nodded. I know. I share your hesitation. Once we marry, the realm's expectations will double. They'll demand an heir, or at least the promise of one. They'll look for cracks in our union, exploit them. I want us to be ready for that. His hand found hers. No matter what, I won't leave your side. You have my word. She squeezed his fingers gently. I trust you. But let's not rush. We have enough to manage without hosting a grand ceremony. In that moment, a wave of gratitude swept over her. Jon understood her burdens, shared them. She leaned forward, pressing a gentle kiss to his cheek. They parted at the corridor's intersection, each returning to their own chambers with a sense that someday they would formalize their bond, but only when it felt right. Summer gradually arrived, the days growing longer and warmer. King's Landing shimmered under bright sunshine. Street vendors sold fresh fruits from the reach, while fishermen hauled in bounties from the nearby waters. Daenerys oversaw expansions to the city's harbor, enabling more ships to dock and unload cargo efficiently. The dragon pit repairs progressed steadily, the dome strengthened, the interior improved to accommodate her 3 dragons comfortably if needed. She thought about the Targaryens of old who'd once used the pit to cage their dragons, stifling them until they grew sickly. She vowed to avoid repeating that. Her dragons would remain free to roam, with the pit as a safe haven rather than a prison. Amid these projects, the Stepstones campaign continued. Davos sent regular ravens detailing small victories, pirate ships sunk, hidden coves destroyed, supplies seized. The combined fleet with the free cities had inflicted enough losses to disrupt the pirates significantly. Some of the outlaws scattered to the Basilisk Isles in the far south. Others attempted to flee deeper into the narrow sea. It was messy, but progress was clear. Trade ships reported fewer attacks. Late one morning, a heavily salted raven arrived from Davos. Tyrion read the missive in the council chamber, the corners of his mouth lifting. "Good news," he announced. "They've secured 3 key islands that pirates used as bases. With Braavosi help, they'll establish outposts to maintain order. Davos expects to return by autumn." Daenerys felt a surge of relief. "Well done. The realm owes him thanks. I want a triumphant welcome prepared when they come home. Our coffers can afford a modest ceremony. Food, music, no extravagance. Let the sailors know we appreciate them." By that evening, Daenerys found herself in the mood for a flight. She donned her riding leathers, black with silver accents, and made her way to the courtyard. Drogon lounged, half dozing in the sun, while Rhaegal and Viserion perched on the Red Keep's walls. She approached Drogon, murmuring a soft greeting in Valyrian. The great dragon lifted his massive head, eyes narrowing affectionately. She climbed onto his back, settling into the harness. With a commanding word, she urged him skyward. Powerful wings beat against the air, and they rose above King's Landing, the wind whipping her hair around her face. The city spread below in a mosaic of red-tiled roofs, winding streets, and a glinting harbor. People occasionally looked up, pointing at the queen and her dragon overhead. Drogon soared toward the open countryside beyond the walls. Fields of wheat and barley rippled in the sunlight. In the distance, she spotted farmers tending their crops, small roads connecting hamlets, and the faint shimmer of a distant river. Every so often, she signaled Drogon to dip lower, letting her see the state of the farmland. She noted the presence of new irrigation canals built by local lords with the crown's help. Eventually, she guided Drogon to a small rise near the river, where the land was grassy and dotted with wildflowers. She dismounted, letting him stretch and sniff around while she paced a bit, inhaling the sweet summer air. The grasses swayed in a gentle breeze, tickling her calves. She thought about how easy it would be to remain out here, away from the labyrinth of politics and demands. But the realm needed her, and she needed it. A sudden roar made her look up. Rhaegal approached, bearing Jon, who had evidently decided to follow. She watched as the green dragon landed with relative grace, Jon sliding down to the ground. His hair was tousled by flight, and a broad smile lit his features. "Couldn't let you have all the fun," he teased, striding to her. She grinned back, feeling a rush of affection. For a moment, they were just 2 dragon riders, free in the wide world. They walked by the river, the dragons relaxing in the sun. Daenerys noticed fish leaping in the shallows, and a swirl of birds overhead. It was a far cry from the horrors they had faced beyond the wall or at Winterfell's gates. She felt a pang, recalling the countless who had died to ensure days like this were possible. Jon sensed her introspection. "What's on your mind?" he asked, voice quiet. She hesitated. "I was thinking of those we lost. Yora, Theon, many others. Even some we never knew by name." She paused, exhaling a shaky breath. "And how close we came to losing everything. He slipped an arm around her waist. "We'll honor them by building a realm that remembers. This peace is their legacy." She turned to him. "That's what drives me, Jon. To ensure we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. I'm grateful we have this chance." He leaned in, pressing a tender kiss to her brow. They stood there for a while, watching the lazy current flow. Eventually, they remounted and took flight, looping northward before returning to King's Landing. The city welcomed them back with curious gazes and murmurs of respect. Daenerys dismounted in the courtyard, feeling rejuvenated. She brushed her hand along Drogon's flank, grateful for his steadfast loyalty. Time flowed onward. The mild summer brought prosperity to the Crownlands. Markets thrived, new roads opened, and Daenerys's reforms continued. The alliance with Dorne strengthened. The Iron Islands found stability under Yara's firm rule, and the Vale's internal tensions remained contained. Only the Westerlands offered occasional friction, with a few Lannister bannermen reluctant to accept Targaryen rule. Daenerys worked to show them fairness, though she would not tolerate overt defiance. One day, unexpectedly, a raven arrived from Essos. Missandei brought the parchment to Daenerys in a quiet corridor. "From Meereen," Missandei said, her eyes shining with emotion. "Your Grace, it seems the city stands, but it has faced unrest. The council you left behind struggles to maintain order. Certain old slaver families have resurfaced, fueling tensions." Daenerys's heart clenched. "How did the letter reach us?" "Through a merchant vessel that sailed to Pentos and then to King's Landing. They beg for your attention. There are rumors that some slavers are re-establishing trade in the countryside, abducting freedmen." Rage flickered across Daenerys's face. She remembered freeing Meereen from the chains of slavery, how she had set up a council to govern. She had believed that, in her absence, the city would continue on the path to freedom. Now it seemed old evils had crawled back. She composed herself. "I can't abandon Westeros, but Meereen was under my protection. I swore I'd break the chains forever." Missandei nodded sympathetically. "We must decide carefully. Sending the entire army or the dragons across the sea again could destabilize all you've built here. But ignoring Meereen would be a betrayal of your own ideals." A heavy silence followed. Daenerys could almost feel the weight of Essos pressing on her shoulders. "I'll summon the council," she said. "We'll discuss options. If the people of Meereen are suffering, I can't turn a blind eye." Tyrion, once her hand in Meereen, took the news gravely when she informed him. He had glimpsed the complexity of ruling an Essosi city firsthand. "I fear your absence gave the old power structures room to regrow," he said. "Yet we can't simply fly off and wage war again. Westeros needs you."